The entire program on the presidency, Sunday at 8 p.m. and midnight Eastern. This is American History TV, only on C-SPAN 3.
In 1947, 10 prominent members of the Hollywood film industry refused to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee on their suspected ties to communism. They were held in contempt of Congress, served prison terms, and were blacklisted by Hollywood. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the hearings, with the Hollywood 10, as they came to be called, and the beginning of a long struggle during the Cold War between anti-communist forces in Congress and Hollywood filmmakers. Up next on American History TV, Blacklist survivors, family members, and artists read testimonies and statements from those subpoenaed during the congressional hearings. The Writers Guild Foundation and Hollywood Progressive co-hosted this nearly 4-hour event.
Mr. Stripling.
The record will show that on October 27, 1947, a subcommittee of the House Un-American Activities Committee met with the chairman, Dishonorable J. Parnell Thomas, presiding.
The House Un-American Activities Committee is in session.
Let yourself go.
You, sir, are not even subpoenaed to testify here.
Yeah, I'm going to speak anyway.
Very well, Mr. Dreyfus.
My name is Richard Dreyfus. And I am a child of the Blacklist. My parents were not in show business, but they were the victims of the Blacklist nonetheless. I lived on 218th Street in Bayside, Queens, and every house on that block was lived in by a communist or a socialist. And if you had not fought Hitler twice and had not gone to the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, you better have a damn good reason. When I was a young boy, I turned to my mom and I said, "I'm the luckiest kid in the world." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm white, Jewish, and American." And she said, "It's time you came into the meetings." And when I was about 10, I turned to a friend of my father's, Tommy Grasso, and I said, I get it. Your totalitarian psychopath is better than his totalitarian psychopath." And that was the end of my being a red diaper baby. But they were, and remain to this day, the most influential moral influences on my life and character. They loved America, as few people have ever loved it. And when they came back from the Second World War, they were accused of being premature anti-fascists. Let's think about that phrase for a second. Premature anti-fascist means that you were against Hitler too soon. You really had a hidden agenda, and you're a communist. I want you to know that I grew up with those who talked and those who didn't. And I was raised among the children of both sides. And I was moved and outraged as a child at what had been happening. And I remain outraged and moved. And I believe that Hollywood is a place that has no room for this here and now or then. There are Republicans in this town who believe that they are being blacklisted. If that's so, and I don't really know if it is so, but if it's so, they have the right to the same moral outrage as we have. And I want to underscore one point. This is not about politics. It was never about politics. It was about a Stalinist technique to terrify your best friend until he turned on you and denied you the only way you had to feed your children. That was McCarthyism. That was the Blacklist. It was an act of humiliation. And if it's going on today, we should be ashamed of it. As I grew up, I would ask men who had been blacklisted, would you work with a Nazi? And as they were putting their thoughts together, I said, because they thought you were a Nazi. And it doesn't mitigate, and it doesn't change too much, but it gives you a little glimpse. This is a complex thing. This is not simple. But this is something that gives our profession and our lives true meaning. And I will now tell you my story. Some years ago, there was an article written by a writer named Mark Stein, who was discussing the sullen attitude of the present left in Hollywood because they were opposed to Elia Kazan's getting a Life Achievement Award. In the article, he said, Dreyfus and company opposed anything that Gaj Kazan had done in his post-testimony anti-communist crusade. And so I wrote Mr. Stein a letter, which I don't know if he ever got because he didn't answer. And I said, Mr. Stein, I want you to know that you have done me the largest and greatest favor I have ever received. I didn't even know I wanted it until you gave it to me. All my life, I have wanted to be named. And you named me. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. But you misunderstand McCarthyism and you misunderstand the Blacklist. And then I told him that it was a personal thing. It was your best friend. And then I went on to say, if Elia Kazan had not received 8 Academy Awards for being Best Director or Best Writer or Best Director, there might have been some excuse to think about honoring him. But having had those honors, I can only think that giving him a Life Achievement Award was a testimony to his moral character. And for that, I have a clear negative no. Elia Kazan's life was the life of a serial betrayer. He betrayed the Actors Studio, he betrayed Lee Strasberg, he betrayed Stella Adler, he betrayed the United States of America and every fellow communist in his life. And then he capped it. 30 years after he had stopped his career, he wrote a book, which was his autobiography. And in that book, he named for the first time the names of the wives of the men who had stuck by him for 30 years, who he had fucked. And men and women all over the Upper Side of New York had to look at one another in their living rooms in their older age with horror and shock. He had to betray somebody. So I said at the time that if I was there that night, I would be sitting on my hands. I am sitting on my hands now. My enemy is the terror. It is not the party. My enemy is your enemy. It is the terror, the mass hysteria that sweeps us all left and right. If I live long enough to find that the children of the left and the blacklist are shutting down right-wing speakers at universities, we have entered hell. So this is your responsibility.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Dreyfus.
And as Zero Mostel once said, shut up. This is your responsibility. It is your responsibility to change it. Get your kids educated again. Don't keep them so stupid. Good night.
Woo!
All right, point of order. Point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Dreyfus.
You have been named.
Truer words have never been spoken.
Thank you, sir.
And for much, much, much more of that, check out the Dreyfus Initiatives. It's terrific stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, our hosts for tonight are two grandchildren of artists persecuted. I am a grandchild of Jack and Madeline Guilford. Thank you, yes. And Tanya Verifield, the granddaughter of blacklisted screenwriter Robert Lees, co-writer of subversive communist propaganda pictures like Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein.
Thank you, Max. And our HUAC Greek chorus portraying the not-so-grand inquisitors, such as Congressman J. Parnell Thomas and Chief HUAC investigator Robert Stripling, are Don Williams, playwright and managing artistic director of the Art of Acting Studio, plus actors Jesse Staccato of the Harold Clurman Laboratory Theater Company, and David Langell, who has acted in the Showtime series Ray Donovan and Masters of Sex. Can you turn that mic off? The Hollywood Blacklist, perhaps the most notorious cultural events of the American Cold War years, should be seen in the larger context of political persecutions, firings, career losses, jailings, and FBI surveillance that extended for more than a decade after 1947. Is there an echo? Okay. Tonight is the exact 70th anniversary to the day when John Howard Lawson testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was the first member of the Hollywood 10 to be a witness before HUAC. There were earlier hearings, including testimony of ferocious anti-communists such as Walt Disney, and HUAC had summoned other artists, including German composer Hans Eisler. The blacklist was focused on Hollywood, a surefire way for HUAC to get headlines. And more than 300 members of the entertainment industry were banned from working for the studios. But this wave of repression extended far beyond Tinseltown to union members, activists, and others across America. By 1950, it spawned McCarthyism, which concentrated on U.S. government and military personnel. Let's make something very clear. From the Palmer raids to HUAC to McCarthyism to COINTELPRO to today, U.S. government repression has generally been aimed at the American left. Tonight, amid new attacks on the First Amendment, we remember the Hollywood Blacklist with readings from HUAC transcripts, statements artists were refused to make, red channels, and other blacklist-related texts. They have been edited for time and clarity and will be read by blacklist survivors, relatives of persecuted artists, and contemporary progressive artists and activists. We will also have some personal recollections, special videos by Ed Asner and Lee Grant, plus a clip from the new French documentary, Red and Blue. We had such a big response to our call for speakers that we have a full program, with one intermission with Swing Inc. performing in the lobby. While we include some testimony by informers, instead of dwelling on villainy and victimhood, tonight we pay tribute to valor, to those intrepid resistors who refuse to be intimidated by the iron heel of the state. We honor them for their heroic defiance, whether or not they face blacklisting themselves, and by standing up, often valiantly place themselves in the line of fire as gladiators for justice. We pay homage to them all by reading their fighting words. And now, the granddaughter of actor and producer Kirk Douglas, who helped break the blacklist in 1960, actress Kelsey Douglas. Kelsey will read a statement especially written by her grandfather, Kirk Douglas, for tonight's 70th anniversary commemoration of the Hollywood Blacklist.
Thank you for letting me participate in this special evening. The Blacklist is very personal to me. I know many people whose lives and careers were adversely affected by it. Are we better now? Then let me start over. Thank you for letting me participate in this very special evening. The Blacklist is very personal to me, for I knew many people whose lives were adversely affected by it. As you recall, the Writers Guild was kind enough to give me its Laurel Award in 1991 for breaking the blacklist. I treasure that honor and what it represents, but I wish there was never a blacklist to break. Looking back, it's shocking that something so inherently un-American could last for more than a decade, outliving both Congressman J. Parnell Thomas, the disgraced chairman of the American Activities Committee, and Senator Joe McCarthy, who became the Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations chairman in 1953. I myself was never a target of HUAC. I wasn't important enough. I had made only one picture, The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, written by Robert Rawson and directed by Louis Milestone. That was in 1946. 2 years later, both of them were on the blacklist. By the time Senator Joe McCarthy claimed he had lists of hundreds of communists and opened his Senate hearings, my standing in Hollywood had risen considerably. I had been Oscar nominated for Champion, written by Carl Foreman, who penned my film Young Man with a Horn. Carl, too, was blacklisted. I used to visit him in London, where he fled just days before the State Department pulled his passport. He told me his Hollywood friends were afraid to be seen with him, even outside of America. Lee Grant made a brilliant film debut with me in Detective Story. It brought her an Oscar nomination and Best Actress award at Cannes. After Lee criticized HUAC at her friend Joe Bromberg's memorial service and refused to testify against her husband, she too was blacklisted. Her banishment lasted longer than the marriage, a full 10 years. I was indignant about the witch hunts in Washington, but that is as far as it went for me. Like most people, I followed the 1947 hearings on the radio and later watched the Senate hearings on television during the McCarthy years. Aside from my outrage when MGM made me sign a loyalty oath in order to play Vincent van Gogh in Lust for Life, I was far too busy with Bryna, my new production company, to get involved. Little did I realize then how deeply the hearings would impact my life. 70 years ago today, Dalton Trumbo, the highest paid screenwriter in the business and one of Hollywood's most colorful characters, was in Washington being badgered by J. Parnell Thomas and his House Un-American Activities Committee. If Dalton hadn't been convicted of contempt of Congress and been blacklisted, I could never have afforded to hire him, or rather his alter ego, Sam Jackson. And then there was Howard Fast, who used his time in prison to write the novel about a slave gladiator in Rome I later optioned. Of course, making a film from a book written by a communist and using a writer rumored to be Dalton Trumbo made me a target of Hedda Hopper, who threatened to destroy me and the film. Let me make something clear. I didn't put Dalton's name on the screen because playing Spartacus had gone to my head. I was no hero. However, I was tired of being a hypocrite like so many others in the film business, including the studios. We all use blacklisted writers, just as long as they didn't step onto the lot. Oh, and of course, we had to hide their true identities, although it was an open secret which blacklisted writer was working on what. Maybe it was Stanley Kubrick who pushed me over the edge. When we were sitting around deciding whose name should go in as writer in the credits, Stanley volunteered to, as he put it, help us out by letting us use his. I was shocked that he would want to take credit for someone else's work. And so after I made the decision, I celebrated by inviting Dalton for lunch at Universal. I left a pass for him at the gate, I met him there, and we walked together to the commissary. "What will you have today, Mr. Trumbo?" I asked him in a loud voice when the waiter came by. It was one of the best lunches I ever ate.
Thank you, Kelsey. We are honored by your presence representing Kirk Douglas.
We call Tony Khan to the witness stand.
Tony Khan, you're being called to the witness stand. Tony Khan is the son of Writers Guild co-founder Gordon Khan, the screenwriter of notorious commie propaganda pictures such as the 1942 World War II morale booster, A Yank on the Burma Road, and 1944's Cowboy and the Senorita, starring those subversive thespians Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, and that Moscow mastermind, Trigger. Khan wrote over 40 films, including uncredited All Quiet on the Western Front and The African Queen. He also wrote Hollywood on Trial, a book that attacked HUAC and infuriated J. Edgar Hoover so much that he labeled Gordon a national security risk and put him under surveillance for 15 years, till the day he died. For his so-called thought crimes, Gordon became one of the Hollywood 19.
Tony Khan is a 40-year veteran writer, producer, and host on PBS and NPR. He produced NPR's award-winning Blacklisted docudrama series. Tony is currently heard on NPR's Says You quiz show, and in honor of the 70th anniversary of the Blacklist, has written a new play, The Hound and the Fox, about the pursuit of his father by FBI Führer J. Edgar Hoover, which he hopes to see produced soon in LA. Tony will now tell us about the Hollywood 19 and his father, Gordon Khan.
Thank you. Privilege is too small a word to use for the experience of being here with you tonight. I hope it's only the first 70th anniversary we celebrate. My father, by the way, only claimed to have written additional dialogue for Trigger. He never said he created the character, but he did introduce Roy Rogers to Dale Evans, and that may have been one of his greatest contributions to the culture. As you probably know, this may be old history, but the Hollywood 10 weren't the only witnesses. They were called to appear before HUAC 70 years ago today. In addition to German playwright Bertolt Brecht, who quickly left the country after testifying, knowing that there were much nicer places for him to be, 8 other producers and screenwriters were also subpoenaed in October 1947 to go to Washington and to testify. In case you don't know their names, and they certainly deserve to be repeated, those 8 men were actor Larry Parks, directors Robert Rawson, Louis Milestone, whom you've heard mentioned already, Irving Pitchell or Pitchell, I'm not sure. The remaining 4 were card-carrying members of the Screenwriters Guild. There was Waldo Salt, who he went on to write Serpico and Midnight Cowboy. Howard Koch, best known for a little film called Casablanca. Richard Collins, who eventually informed on 27 people. I ran into his son, and if you want to talk about the experience of the children, they had it just as bad, if not worse, than the kids of those who did not testify. But I told Michael, I said, I'm going to say this about your dad. How do you feel about that? And he said, I'm sorry. I said, I'm going to say that your father did name 27 people. What do you want me to say? How do you feel about that? He said, tell them the truth. Tell them the truth. Well, when HUAC called these 10, it then stopped the hearings for a while. And of these 8 surviving men, no one heard what they had to say to the committee because the committee no longer was in session. When they returned to their investigation of Hollywood in 1950, the committee decided to pick up where they left off, which was with my father. Rumors were circulating at that point that Hoover had submitted a plan to President Truman to send American communists to concentration camps, the same way they did the Japanese Americans in 1941. In fact, using some of the same facilities, only built more. Rather than face that possibility, my father fled to Mexico, where we lived for the next 5 years. He returned to the U.S. and eked out a living writing magazine pieces under a pseudonym and died, still blacklisted, at the age of 62. Although my father, Gordon, never had a chance to express his feelings publicly, he did so in private. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to read just a little bit of what he did commit to paper. First, it's from a letter to my mother in June of 1950. She was in Boston at the time, recovering from surgery, and he had just learned from a man, I think in a barber shop, that somebody with a subpoena might already be on his way to our door. So he rushed home, packed a bag, left my older brother and me in the tub with our aunt, told us he was going to San Francisco, and fled to Mexico. My brother was 8, I was 5, and he probably thought that it would be a good idea not to entrust us with the truth, or let anybody know where he really was headed. Dearest Barbara, he wrote to her in that letter, on Monday night, when a subpoena was almost certain, I decided to get out pronto. There was no use waiting for that extra day or two, and not even that extra hour. If in full flight from any principle I might possess, I went and recanted everything and every decent thing I believed in to them, it wouldn't be enough. They'd want to know, oh, who else? Now that you were purged, who else? Give us names, dates, and places. Could I live with myself for a minute after I did a thing like that? Could I face my children? If this is a decent world when they grow up, they'd spit on me, and they'd be perfectly justified in doing so. When it actually came to time to leave, I couldn't, well, I can't even write about it now. The poor kids were just mystified. I went to pieces for the first and I hope the last time in my life. I can't find the words to tell you how miserable I feel. I have to leave them now or not at all. I keep seeing their faces and yours every mile of the trip. But don't worry, I'll hold you all in my arms very soon. 9 months later, we were reunited and began our 5-year exile in Mexico. Now, the second thing, and the last thing that I want to read to you, is probably also the last thing that he ever wrote. It's a single sentence. My mother found it on a piece of paper on his desk in New Hampshire, where he'd left it the day before he died. It said, I stood before the tribunal of my own mind. She thought it was so true to the man that she knew and who had endured 15 years of obscurity without complaint that she had it engraved on his tombstone. Now, I was 17 when he died, and I knew the Blacklist not as an ideological or political fight, but as a family crisis that I had been buffeted by all my life. But as I've grown older, I can see that in a quiet way, those words embodied the meaning to him of his life, not just as a loyal friend and a father who wanted to set a good example for his 2 boys, but as a good American. I stand before the tribunal of my own mind. Those are the very words I'd like to think that he would have used to defy the committee if he'd had the chance.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tony Khan. Bravo. Actress Marsha Hunt. Bravo. Actress Marsha Hunt. Do we have Marsha here tonight? Is Marsha here? Did she make it? Oh my, Marsha Hunt, actress Marsha Hunt was born in Chicago a century ago this month. Oh my, oh, is she coming up? Oh, this is great. She first appeared on screen at the age of 18. Hey, nice work. Hey, oh, look at that. Standing out. You look beautiful. Doesn't she look beautiful tonight? Let's all, you know what? Let's give her a happy birthday. Can we all do that together? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Oh, we got a band. Birthday, dear Marsha. Happy birthday to you. Go for it. Let's hear it, guys. Happy birthday, dear Marsha. Happy Happy birthday, you. Aww. And many more. Yeah, she first appeared on screen at the age of 18 in the 1935 Paramount picture The Virginia Judge, and went on to act in many productions, including opposite Laurence Olivier in 1940's Pride and Prejudice, the human comedy with Mickey Rooney, 1944's anti-Nazi None Shall Escape, 1947 Smash Up with a script by John Howard Lawson. But after she joined the committee for the First Amendment, broadcast the Hollywood Fights Back radio programs, and flew to Washington to observe the HUAC hearings featuring Cole, Lawson, and other members of the Hollywood 10, her big screen roles vanished. She appeared in TV series, and one of her few movie roles was in Dalton Trumbo's 1971 Johnny Got His Gun, and then the 2015 documentary Marcia Hunt's Sweet Adversity. And I think we have the documentary filmmaker here, Roger. Roger, are you here? That's great. You guys got to see this documentary. It's terrific. It's called Marcia Hunt's Sweet Adversity. So we want to thank you. Thank you for everything. And do you want to say a few words?
Thank you for all that. You're probably overwhelmed by now with those niceties, but it's been a full and wonderfully fortunate life. I've had a chance to speak up now and then, and happily I was able to do it. There are no regrets, and a great deal to look forward to.
Oh, that was wonderful. But you never answer the question, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I didn't hear that. What did you say?
I said, are you a communist?
Oh, I've been called one often enough, but I'm not even sure I ever met one.
What does one look like? Look to your right, look to your left. It's probably someone sitting right next to you who's a communist. All right, thank you so much. Yeah, let's help you down here. Thank you so much. Here we go. Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's hard to
it's
see.
perfect. Yeah, it doesn't feel very secure, but there it is.
Okay.
Hey! I think that's you. Yeah, no, go ahead.
We called John Howard Lawson to testify.
70 years ago today, on October 27, 1947, this is what Marcia and other eyewitnesses saw in Washington as the first member of the Hollywood 10, John Howard Lawson, testified before HUAC. Lawson was the first president of what's now the Writers Guild of America. He was also reputedly the leader of the Communist Party's Hollywood branch. Lawson's screen credits include Hollywood's first Spanish Civil War feature, 1938's Blockade with Henry Fonda, plus World War II morale boosters starring Humphrey Bogart. During the Blacklist, Lawson used pseudonyms, including for 1951's adaptation of the South African anti-apartheid novel, Cry the Beloved Country, with Sidney Poitier, and in his final role, Canada Lee. Like HUAC's first Hollywood 10 witness, actor Ed Asner refused to grovel before gavels. On screen, the 5-time Golden Globe Award winner and 7-time Emmy Award winner is best known for portraying crusty newsman Lou Grant in the Mary Tyler Moore and Lou Grant TV series, and for appearing in the landmark miniseries Rich Man, Poor Man and Roots. In the 1983 movie Daniel, Ed depicted the attorney for the fictionalized Rosenbergs, the so-called atomic spies, who were the only U.S. civilians executed for espionage during the Cold War. Ed also gave voice to Carl Fredricksen, not Marx, in 2009's 2-time Oscar winner Up.
Off-screen, Ed is also renowned as a tireless human rights champion. During the 1980s, when Ed was SAG president, he clashed with the Central America policies of U.S. President Reagan, who, when he was SAG president, was an FBI informant who betrayed actors. Yes, we all know the story. Here in a video especially shot for our Blacklist commemoration, I think we can roll the curtains now, Ed Asner reads John Howard Lawson's testimony, which took place exactly 70 years ago today. Enjoy.
Mr. Chairman, I have a statement here which I wish to make.
Well, all right. Let me see your statement.
Do you have a copy of that?
We can get your copies.
I
don't care to read any more of that statement. The statement will not be read. I read the first line.
You have spent 1 week vilifying me before the American public.
Now, just a minute.
And you refuse to allow me to make a statement on my rights as an American citizen. I wish to protest against the unwillingness of this committee to read a statement when you permitted Mr. Warner, Mr. Mayor, and others to read statements in this room.
Mr. Lawson, you will please be responsive to these questions and not continue to try to disrupt these hearings.
I am not on trial here, Mr. Chairman. This committee is on trial here. This committee is on trial here. Before the American people. Let us get that straight. I wish to frame my own answers to your questions, Mr. Chairman, and I intend to do so. It is absolutely beyond the power of this committee to inquire to any association, to my association, in any organization.
Mr. Lawson, you will have to stop or you will leave the witness stand. And you will leave the witness stand because you are in contempt. That is why you will leave the witness stand. And if you are just trying to force me to put you in contempt, you won't have to try much harder. You know what happens to a lot of people that have been in contempt of this committee this year, don't you?
I am told that you have made it perfectly clear that you are going to threaten and intimidate the witnesses, Mr. Chairman. I am an American, and I'm not at all easy to intimidate. And don't think I am.
Mr. Lawson, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of the United States?
In framing my answer to that question, I must emphasize the points that I've raised before. The question of communism is in no way related to this inquiry, which is an attempt to get control of the screen and to invade the basic rights of American citizens in all fields.
Now, I must object.
Mr. Chairman.
The question here relates not only to the question of my membership in any political organization, but this committee is attempting to establish the right which has been historically denied to any committee of this sort, to invade the rights and privileges and immunity of American citizens, whether they be Protestant, Methodist, Jewish, or Catholic, whether they be Republicans or Americans or anything else.
Mr. Lawson, just quiet down again. The most pertinent question that we can ask is whether or not you have ever been a member of the Communist Party. Now, do you care to answer that question?
You are using the old technique which was used in Hitler's Germany in order to create a scare here, in order to create an entirely false atmosphere in which this hearing is conducted. The Bill of Rights was established precisely to prevent the operation of any committee which would invade the basic rights of Americans. Now, if you want to know...
Mr. Chairman, the witness is not answering the question.
If you want to know about the perjury that has been committed here and the perjury that is planned...
Mr. Lawson!
Yeah, you permit me and my attorneys to bring in here the witnesses that testified last week. And you permit us to cross-examine these witnesses. And we will show up the whole tissue of life.
We are going to get the answer to that question if we have to stay here for a week. Are you a member of the Communist Party, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It is unfortunate and tragic that I have to teach this committee the basic principles of America.
That is not the question. That is not the question. The question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I am framing my answer in the only way in which any American citizen can frame his answer to a question which absolutely invades his rights.
Then you refuse to answer that question. Is that correct?
I have told you that I will offer my beliefs, affiliations, and everything else to the American public, and they will know where I stand.
Excuse the witness.
As they do from what I have written.
Stand away from the stand. Stand away from the stand.
I have written Americanism for many years, and I shall continue to fight for the Bill of Rights, which you are trying to destroy.
Officers, take this man away from the stand. There will be no demonstrations. No demonstrations for or against. Everyone will please be seated.
No demonstration.
Order. Recall Albert Maltz to the witness stand.
Screenwriter Albert Maltz was one of the few, is this on?
Hold on, they'll come back on. They'll come back. There they are.
Unfriendly witnesses allowed to read a statement. Prior to testifying before HUAC in October 1947, Robert E. Stripling was a chief investigator for HUAC, and Quisling is a World War II synonym for a traitor. Here, actress Mira Larkin, Maltz's granddaughter, reads parts of her grandfather's statement and HUAC testimony. Mira Larkin was born in Mexico City, where her mother, Catherine, the youngest child of Albert Maltz and Margaret Larkin, had lived since the age of 7. Mira left Mexico in 1967 after the passing of her grandmother and lived in San Francisco since 1968. Over the last 20 years, she has been an actress and production manager of indie films. Is she here? Oh, great.
Thank you for the honor of being here today. Try not to cry.
Love you, Mira.
Thank you. I am an American, and I believe that there is no more proud word in the vocabulary of man. I am a novelist and screenwriter, and I have produced a certain body of work in the past 15 years. As with any writer, that I have written has come from the total fabric of my life, my birth in this land. Our schools and games, our atmosphere of freedom, of our tradition of inquiry, criticism, discussion, tolerance. Whatever I am, America has made me. And I, in turn, possess no loyalty as great as the one I have to this land, to the economic and social welfare of its people, to the perpetuation and development of its democratic way of life. Now, at the age of 39, I am commanded to appear before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. For a full week, this committee has encouraged an assortment of well-rehearsed witnesses to testify that I and others are subversive and un-American. It has refused us the opportunity that any pickpocket receives in a magistrate's court, the right to cross-examine these witnesses, to refute their testimony, to reveal their motives, their history, and who exactly they are. Furthermore, it grants these witnesses congressional immunity so that we may not sue them for libel for their slanders. I maintain that this is an evil and vicious procedure, that it is illegally unjust and morally indecent, and that it places in danger every other American, since if the right of any one citizen can be invaded, then the constitutional guarantees of every other American has been subverted, and no one any longer protected from official tyranny. My film, The Pride of the Marines, was premiered in 28 cities at Guadalcanal Day banquets. under the auspices of the United States Marine Corps. Another film, Destination Tokyo, was premiered aboard a U.S. submarine and was adopted by the Navy as an official training film. My short film, The House I Live In, was given a special award by the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences for its contribution to racial tolerance. This, then, is the body of work for which this committee urges I be blacklisted in the film industry, and tomorrow, if it has its way, in the publishing and magazine fields also, by cold censorship, if not legislation. I must not be allowed to write. Will this censorship stop with me? Or has the others now singled out for attack? If it requires acceptance of the ideas of this committee to remain immune from the brand of un-Americanism, then who is ultimately safe from this committee except members of the Ku Klux Klan? Why else does this committee now seek to destroy me and others? Because of our ideas, unquestionably. In 1908, when he was President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "Opinion and the just maintenance of it shall never be a crime in my view, nor bring injury to the individual." Very well then, here is the other reasons why I and others have been commanded to appear before this committee. Our ideas. In common with many Americans, I supported the New Deal. In common with many Americans, I supported, against Mr. Thomas and Mr. Rankin, the anti-lynching bill. I signed petitions for these measures, joined organizations that advocated them, contributed money, sometimes spoke from public platforms, and will continue to do so. I will take my philosophy from Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and I will not be dictated to or intimidated by men to whom the Ku Klux Klan, as a matter of committee record, is an acceptable American institution. I state further that on many questions of public interest, my opinions as a citizen have not always been in accord with the opinions of the majority. They are now, nor have my opinions ever been fixed and unchanging, nor are they now fixed and unchangeable. But right or wrong, I claim and I insist upon my right to think freely, to speak freely, to join the Republican Party or the Communist Party, the Democratic or the Prohibition Party, to publish whatever I please, to fix my mind or change my mind without dictation from anyone, to offer any criticism I think fitting of any public official or policy, to join whatever organizations I please, no matter what certain legislatures may think of them. Above all, I challenge the right of this committee to inquire into my political or religious beliefs or in any matter or degree, and I assent that not the conduct of this committee, but its very existence are a subversion of the Bill of Rights. If I were a spokesman for General Franco, I would not be here today. I would rather be here. I would rather die than be a shabby American, groveling before whose names are Thomas and Rankin, but who carry out motives in America like those carried out in Germany by Goebbels and Himmler. The American people are going to have to choose between the Bill of Rights and the Thomas Committee. They can't have both. One or the other must be abolished in the immediate future.
Mr. Stripling, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I have answered the question, Mr. Quisling. I am sorry. I want you to know.
I object to that statement.
Excuse the witness. No more questions. Typical communist line.
We call Ring Lardner to testify. Order.
At the age of only 27, screenwriter Ring Lardner Jr. Coe won an Oscar for the first Tracy Hepburn picture, 1942's Woman of the Year. Ring went on to write anti-fascist movies like Tomorrow, The World, and part of the 1944 film noir classic Laura. Today, directed by Outer Preminger, of course, as one of the Hollywood 10, Lardner served time behind bars with fellow screenwriter Lester Cole and the by then disgraced, corrupt HUAC chairman J. Parnell Thomas. After the Blacklist, Ring won his second Academy Award for the 1970 Korean War comedy MASH. And let's hope we get out of here before the second Korean War. Yeah, go ahead.
Mike Farrell is an actor, writer, director, and producer, probably best known for playing Captain B.J. Honeycutt in the TV version of MASH. Mike is a former SAG vice president. He is co-chair emeritus of the SoCal Committee of Human Rights Watch, and since 1994, president of Death Penalty Focus. Before the invasion of Iraq, Mike co-founded with Robert Greenwald Artists United to Win Without War.
Mr. Lardner, how long have you been a writer?
I've been a writer about 10 years. Mr. Chairman, I have a short statement I'd like to make.
Mr. Lardner, the committee is unanimous in the fact that after you testify, you may read your statement.
Thank you.
Mr. Lardner, are you a member of the Screenwriters Guild?
Mr. Stir-Rippling, I would like to be cooperative about that, but there are certain limits to my cooperation. I don't want to help you divide or smash this particular guild or to infiltrate the motion picture business in any way for the purpose which seems to me to be to try to control that business, to control what the American people can see and hear in their motion picture theaters.
Now, Mr. Lardner, don't do like the others if I were you, or you will never read your statement.
Oh, but I understand you to say that I would be permitted to read the statement, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, after you are finished with the questions and answers.
Yes.
But you certainly haven't answered the questions.
Well, I'm going to answer the questions, but I don't think you qualified in any way your statement that I would be allowed to read this statement.
Then I will qualify it now. If you refuse to answer the questions, then you will not read your statement.
Well, I know that is an indirect way of saying you don't want me to read the statement. Well, I'm not very good at haranguing, and I won't try it, but it seems to me that if you make me answer this question tomorrow, you could make somebody else ask somebody else whether he believed in spiritualism.
Oh, no. There is no chance of our asking anyone whether they believe in spiritualism, and you know it. This is just plain silly.
You might.
Now, we haven't learned your lines very well.
I'm also concerned as an American with the question of whether this committee has the right to ask me.
All right. Go to the $64 question.
Mr. Lardner, are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party?
Well, I would like to answer that question, too. It seems to me you're trying to discredit the Screenwriters Guild through me and the motion picture industry through the Screenwriters Guild and our whole practice of freedom of expression.
If you and others are members of the Communist Party, you are the ones who are discrediting the Screenwriters Guild.
I'm trying to answer the question by stating first what I feel about the purpose of the question, which is, as I say, is to discredit the whole motion picture industry.
You won't say anything first. You're refusing to answer this question.
No, I'm saying my understanding is, as an American...
Never mind your understanding. There is a question. Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I could answer that exactly the way you want, Mr. Chairman. Depends on the circumstances. I could answer it, but, you know, if I did, I'd hate myself in the morning.
Leave the witness chair.
I think I'm leaving by force.
Sergeant, take the witness away.
The committee calls Samuel Ornitz.
The Hollywood 10 Samuel Ornitz wrote the Hell's Highway chain gang drama and John Wayne's Lefty Dust Bowl movie Three Faces West. Reading Sam's testimony is great-grandniece Donna Ornitz, a pediatric ophthalmologist. Is that how you say it? Okay, got it.
Are you a member of the Screenwriters Guild?
I wish to reply to that question by saying that this involves a serious question of conscience for me.
Conscience?
Conscience, sir, conscience.
Are you a member of the Screenwriters Guild?
I am replying to that question to the best of my ability and in spite of the interruptions. If I may reply to it in less detail than our chairman did this morning in practicing intimidation, and as he has practiced it continually during this hearing, the question of conscience... the question of conscience and constitutional rights are not simple matters to me. So, kindly let me answer the question. I'm asking this as a citizen and taxpayer of representatives of my government to let me answer the question conscientiously. I say you do raise a serious question of conscience for me when you ask me to act in concert with you to override the Constitution. Wait a minute, let me answer the question.
Ask the next question.
You're asking me to violate a constitutional guarantee.
It does not involve a constitutional guarantee.
It does.
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
I wish to state to you that my political affiliations, like my religious affiliation, is a matter of fully guaranteed by the Constitution. I can belong to any party that I see fit to join, and you have no right to inquire into it.
This witness is through. Stand aside.
I have replied to that.
This witness is through. Stand aside. All right, next witness.
We call Bertolt Brecht to the stand.
Guillaume Lebeau is a French filmmaker, screenwriter, novelist, and journalist. He co-made the new French documentary Red and Blue about Hollywood's depiction of the Russian Revolution. Guillaume flew from Paris with his fellow filmmakers to take part in this Blacklist commemoration. Later, they are screening a clip of their film. Much later, they are screening a film of their. A clip of the film tonight here. DVDs of the English language version of Red and Blue will be sold in the lobby at the end of tonight's program. Guillaume Lebeau reads the HUAC testimony by the German playwright Bertolt Brecht.
Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party in any country?
Sorry, I'm Thibaut Bertrand. This is Guillaume Lebeau. We are two. Different person. Sorry. I have heard...
I'll repeat the question. Are
yes,
you now,
please.
or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party in any country?
I have heard my colleagues, and they consider this question not as proper, but I am a guest in this country and do not want to enter in any legal argument, so I will answer your question fully as well I can. I was not a member, or I'm not a member of any communist party.
Mr. Brecht, is it true that you have written very revolutionary poems, plays, and other writings?
I've written a number of poems, songs, and plays in the fight against Hitler, and of course, they can be considered, therefore, as revolutionary, because I, of course, was for the overthrow of that government.
Mr. Brecht, could you tell the committee how many times you've been to Moscow?
Yeah, I was invited to Moscow 2 times.
And how many of your writings have been based on the philosophy of Lenin, Marx?
No, I don't think that is quite correct. But of course, I had to study as a playwright, I think, who wrote historical plays. I, of course, had to study Marx's ideas about history. I do not think that intelligent plays today can be written without that study. Also, history is widely influenced by the studies of Marx about history.
Mr. Brecht, since you have been in the US, have you met with any officials of the Soviet government?
Yes, in Hollywood I was invited 3 or 4 times, to the Soviet consulate with many other writers, artists, and actors to receptions.
And did you collaborate with Hans Eisler in the song In Praise of Learning?
Yeah, collaborate. I wrote that song, he only wrote the music. It comes from an adaptation I made of Gorky's novel The Mother, and in this song, a Russian worker woman advises other poor people.
Yes, and now I'll read the words. Again, you must learn the lesson. You must be ready to take over.
No, excuse me, that is a wrong translation. May I speak to the translator?
The correct translation would be, you must take the lead.
You don't ever recall anyone in the United States ever asking you to join the Communist Party?
No, I don't recall anybody having asked me.
I would like to ask Mr. Brecht whether he wrote a song rather entitled Forward We've Not Forgotten.
No, I wrote a German poem, but that is very different from this thing.
Okay, that's all the questions that I have, Mr. Chairman.
Immediately after testifying before HUAC, Bertolt Brecht, who had previously escaped from Nazi Germany, fled America and resettled in the German Democratic Republic, never to come to America again. The Blacklist continued to divide Hollywood well into 1950, when in October of that year, it reached a boiling point in what was then called the Screen Directors Guild. Here to tell us about it is Turner Classic Movies host Ben Mankiewicz. I'm a huge fan of this guy. And honestly, there's a lot here, but he needs no further introduction. Here's Ben Mankiewicz.
Thank you, everybody. Let me first echo Tony Khan and just say that it's a real privilege to be here tonight. So thanks very much. And a quick promo. It's not really a promo. I think you guys would be interested. But during November on Turner Classic Movies, our spotlight is on the Blacklist. We will be featuring films throughout the month of movies made by blacklisted artists, writers, directors, actors, of course. And toward the end of the month, I think the 27th and 28th, we will have 2 nights of programming presented by Lee Grant. And you won't want to miss that. Lee was, well, you know Lee. Again, thanks for having me. The screenwriting credits of my grandfather, Herman Mankiewicz, they include a couple of classics, Pride of the Yankees and Citizen Kane. Famously, like many of you here tonight, Herman had a way with words. And one night in October of 1950, he phoned his younger brother, Joe Mankiewicz. He was screening a movie at Fox late at night. And Herman asked Joe, "What do you and Andrew Johnson have in common?" "Go on," said Joe, knowing a punchline was coming. "You're being impeached, my boy," was Herman's response. When he got the call, Joe was president of what was then the Screen Directors Guild. During his career, Joe's directing credits included All About Eve, Letter to Three Wives, Sleuth, and Cleopatra. But surprisingly, it wasn't Cleopatra that had Joe on the verge of being removed from office. Opposition came in the form of Cecil B. DeMille, who'd rallied against unionism at the Guild at the first meeting of the Guild 14 years earlier. DeMille was leading a group of conservative directors seeking to impose a loyalty oath on Guild members. Joe called that a de facto blacklist. John Huston summed up the era well. He said, "It was not a very good time for the Guild or for anything else in this country." The matter came to a head October 22nd, 1950, when 300 plus directors gathered for a Western-style showdown. Except it was at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And there was probably catering. And like half the Guild members were Jewish, but other than that, it was just like a Western. Joe opened the proceedings. He said this: "This meeting can become very easily the most important in our history. It is entirely up to us whether we shall remember this night with satisfaction and pride, or whether it shall be remembered as the night we lost the Guild." What led to that night is really extraordinary. Since Joe opposed the mandatory loyalty oath, specifically he opposed DeMille's open ballot on the measure, requiring directors to say in an open ballot whether they opposed the loyalty oath or not, DeMille then tried to remove Joe from office, and he did it in the middle of the night, and he did it by sending out recall ballots on anonymous stationery, but with the Guild as the return address. It said this: "This is a ballot to recall Joe Mankiewicz. Sign here, yes." There was no space for no. Then DeMille sent the ballots out in the middle of the night to be delivered by motorcycle courier. But DeMille's gang deliberately avoided sending them to 55 directors that he knew were loyal to Joe. However, they made a mistake when DeMille loyalist George Marshall showed up in a motorcycle sidecar at John Farrow's house. Farrow threw him out, and then he drove over to my grandfather Herman's house, which led to Herman's call to Joe screening a movie at Fox after 11 p.m. From there, Joe, with the help from the heroes of the affair, George Stevens, John Huston, Farrow, William Wyler, Richard Brooks, Billy Wilder, Nick Ray, Robert Wise, they got 25 members to sign a petition that demanded a full open meeting of the board, and that's the meeting of Sunday, October 22nd. And that's the night where we got a real sense of the sinister conspiratorial atmosphere of the era. First, DeMille, of course, the great showman, he directed this is true, a pink spotlight to shine down on Joe's bald head. That's subtle. Then he suggested the 25 directors who'd signed the petition to force the open meeting might not be loyal Americans. Many, he said, were foreign-born. Mr. DeMille, said Fritz Lang, do you know this is the first time since I'm in America that I'm afraid because I have an accent? DeMille was booed, but he was undeterred. Asked to withdraw his accusations, DeMille then doubled down, pronouncing the names of immigrant Jewish directors with an accent. Willy Weiler, Fred Cinnamon, he said. DeMille had lost the room. Finally, a man Joe had been counting on, a man whose opinion could sway the membership, a man who'd been silent for 5 hours, stood up. Wearing his tennis shoes, his hat, with his pipe, and chewing on a handkerchief, he said, my name's Jack Ford, and I make Westerns. I admire you, Ford told DeMille, but I don't like you. And I don't like what you stand for tonight. Ford said he had helped found the Guild, quote, to protect ourselves against producers. Now somebody wants to give out to producers what looks to me like a blacklist. Ford then stunned the board by calling for DeMille and the rest of the 15 members of the board to resign, and then he turned to Joe and said, let's turn the Guild over to the Polak and go home. Then tomorrow, Ford added, let's go back and make movies. Thank you.
Another one of the anti-oath leaders who took the 1950s equivalent of a knee was former Guild President John Cromwell. He directed Bette Davis in Of Human Bondage and Ronald Colman in The Prisoner of Zenda. He was one of the Hollywood artists who was blacklisted even though he never joined the Communist Party. Tonight, his son, Jamie Cromwell, who I'm sure many of you know, he's long been one of Hollywood's leading actors and activists. His friend Mickey Schwerner was, along with James Chaney and Andrew Goodman, one of the civil rights martyrs murdered in Mississippi in 1964. He can next be seen on screen in 2018's Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and he will now give us a piece on Larry Parks, who had recently hit it big portraying Al Jolson in two popular pictures when he was called to the stand on March 21st, 1951. There's Jamie Cromwell.
Thank you.
The Spanish Inquisition calls Larry Parks.
I will tell you everything that I know about myself. I would prefer, if you will allow me, not to mention other people's names. Don't present me with this choice of either being in contempt of this committee or going to jail, or forcing me to really crawl through the mud and be an informer. I don't think that this is American. It is more akin to what happened under Hitler. So I beg you not to force me to do this.
Who were the members of the cell of the Communist Party to which you were assigned during the period from 1941 on up to the time you disassociated yourselves from the party about 1945?
This is what I've been talking about. This is the thing that I am no longer fighting for myself, because I'll tell you frankly that I am probably the most completely ruined man that you have ever seen. I am fighting for a principle, I think. If Americanism is involved in this particular case, this is what I have been talking about. I do not believe that it benefits this committee to force me to do this. I do not believe it benefits this committee or its purposes to force me to do this. This is my honest feeling about it. I don't think that this is fair play. I don't think that it is in the spirit of real Americanism as we know it. These are not people that are a danger to this country. Gentlemen, they are people that I knew. They are people like myself.
I direct the witness to answer the question.
I do not refuse to answer the question, but I feel that the committee is doing a really dreadful thing that I don't believe the American people will look at kindly. This is my opinion. I don't think that they will consider this as honest, just, and in the spirit of fair play.
If you will just answer the question, please. The question was, who were the members of the Communist Party cell to which you were assigned during the period from 1941 until 1945, or the period when you dissolved your membership with the Communist Party?
Well, Morris Karnofsky, Joe Bromberg, Sam Rawson, Ann Revere, Lee Cobb.
What was that name?
Cobb. Gail Sondergaard, Dorothy Tree. These are the principal names that I recall.
Was James Cagney a member at any time?
Not to my knowledge. I don't recall ever attending a meeting with him.
Was he a member of the Communist Party, to your knowledge?
I don't recall ever hearing that he was...
Edward G. Robinson?
No, I don't recall ever attending a meeting with Edward G. Robinson.
Humphrey Bogart?
I don't recall ever attending a meeting with Humphrey Bogart.
I think that you could get some comfort out of the fact that the people whose names have been mentioned have been subpoenaed, so that if they ever do appear here, it won't be as a result of anything that you have testified to.
It is no comfort whatsoever. Oh, it's hard. There are so many.
And now he's going to read a section on his father, John Cromwell.
Yeah, there are so many people in this room who, Blessed Ellen Gear and lots of other people here who suffered terribly because of this Inquisition. I was going to, my father's testimony was, he had nothing to say. So I thought I would tell you the story about him. He came to Hollywood at the beginning of sound because they didn't have directors that could handle dialogue. And he worked himself up and started to begin to direct pictures. And he was a fairly liberal Democrat, a Roosevelt Democrat, and there was an organization called the Hollywood Democrats. When he became president of the Screen Directors Guild, he quit that organization. It moved slightly to the left. And my father had a party at his house, and there were members of the Moscow Art Theater, and they were explaining to my father and the assembled that when a student graduated the conservatory, the acting conservatory, they were sent to the provinces. And then they worked their way back into Moscow, so that the provinces got the best of the young actors trained in Moscow, and the actors got to hone their craft and develop the skills that they would need once they got to Moscow. And my father said, my God, that's funny, I sound just like him then. My God, that's the way it should be done. What do we do in this country? We take the best and brightest who come out of Yale and Northwestern, and we send them to New York or Hollywood, and we use them up in 1 year, and then they're gone. Adolphe Menjou happened to be at the party, who looks exactly as he is, a snake. And my father, who had a house in Oregon, went to the mailbox and opened Life magazine, and there was a full-page article on HUAC, and there was a sequential series of photos of Adolphe Menjou testifying, and the squib below the pictures was, Adolphe Menjou testifies before the House Un-American Activities Committee. The biggest communist in all of Hollywood is John Cromwell. So they called my father. Now, my father was working then at RKO, and he had signed a $1 million contract with Dory Sherry, who owned the studio at the time. Subsequently to that contract, it was sold to Howard Hughes. My father went and testified, actually on the same day that Bertolt Brecht testified, had nothing to say. So the committee sent a messenger to my father's agent, a wonderful agent named Sam Jaffe, and said, there's no problem with John Cromwell, we just want him to apologize. And Sam said, you will never get John Cromwell to apologize to any committee. So Howard Hughes wanted him out, but he couldn't fire him without violating the contract. In the contract, it stated he had to shoot any picture that the studio gave him, and they gave him a picture called I Married a Communist, a piece of crap. My father, understanding that what they were doing, said, fine, I'll shoot the picture, but you can't shoot this script. This is horrible. You've got to rewrite this. So writer after writer came for months to try to fix this script, which they couldn't. They then would have to have paid him double. So Howard Hughes wrote a check, 1953, for $1 million. My father went to Beverly Hills, bought a building, and moved to the East, was in a play with Henry Fonda called Point of No Return about J.P. Marquand, for which he won a Tony, and lived the rest of his life with my blessed stepmother, who was in the group theater and who knew Lee and and Kazan and many of the people. Ellen's father knew these people really well. They had a wonderful, stunning life in the theater. My father swore he would never come back to this town, and he never did till the very end of his life. And I regret that he did not get to do the pictures that he had in him. But I do not regret that he never put himself through what this town put so many others through, and must never do that again.
Bravo. Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you. Unlike writers and directors, actors could not act under a different name. They could not have a beard or a front, because actors had their faces, that was all they had. Phil Loeb, co-star of the Goldbergs TV series. He may have been suspected of being a Marxist because he appeared in the Marx Brothers room service. The Reds Under the Bed's Cold War hysteria also appears to have contributed to the heart attacks of artists such as Lee Grant's husband, screenwriter Arnie Manoff, actor John Garfield, and his body and soul co-star Canada Lee, whose last film was the South America set, Anti-Apartheid, Cry the Beloved Country.
What we failed to mention was Larry Parks died of a heart attack in 1975.
Oh, yes, there's another one.
And Phil, who you mentioned, committed suicide.
Oh, yes, he jumped out a window.
Despite Lee Grant's Oscar nomination for Detective Story, her brief but bold statement at Joe Bromberg's 1951 memorial service was enough to derail her promising acting career in the so-called land of the free. Nevertheless, Lee survived, was Academy Award nominated 3 times, and won the Best Supporting Actress Oscar for 1975 Shampoo. In a video specially prepared for our commemoration, Lee Grant, who turns 91 on October 31st, shares her reflections on HUAC, the Blacklist, her friend Joe Bromberg, and more. If we can screen that video now.
We present Lee Grant.
Hi, Ed Rempel. Thank you so much for having this event. Hi, Marcia. Happy birthday. Hi, Ben. What had happened was that I left Detective Story, the play, and it became a gigantic film for which I was nominated Best Actress, nominated for the Best Actress. I didn't win in 1952. And by that time, by the time I heard the news about my nomination and about the Cannes Film Festival Award, I couldn't work in film or television. I was blacklisted, and I was blacklisted from 1952, when I was 24, to 1964, when I was 36. I left Detective Story to go into a play called All You Need Is One Good Break. It was written by Arnie Manoff, who later became my husband, and John Barry directed it and starred in it, and Bromberg was also starring in the play. And he would stand in the wings with me as we were ready to go on, and he'd say, what if the American Legion is out there? What if they try and stop the play? I was, why would you say something like that? What's wrong? The House Un-American Activities Committee is asking me to come on and testify. He'd taken the fifth in it, which I didn't know at the time, of course. I can't take it. I have a bad heart. I can't take it. And I was so loving of this wonderful, sweet, kind actor who was a legend. He came from the group theater. And soon he left and went to London, where he was in a play. And within a month of opening in the play, he had a heart attack and died. And so when they set up a memorial to Joe Brownberg, I was asked as a new young voice on Broadway to talk about it. And it was at the Edison Hotel, and it was just thousands were there. I mean, it was just everybody was showing up to show their support, and Clifford Odets was there waiting for Lefty, the giant writer from the group theater. And when it was my turn, I'd never spoken in public before, I just told the audience what Joe had told me, which was that the committee had gotten in touch with him and asked him to testify again, and he said he had a bad heart, and he tried to tell them that, and it killed him. And that was it. And then 2 days later, I went to Actors Equity, and an actor sitting in front of me said, I see that you made it on the list. I said, what do you mean? And he took a book of red channels, which was the blacklisting book. And there it was, and the reason was the things that I'd said at Joe Brownberg's memorial. And so it was that my fortunes had changed. My life had been changed completely. And I learned how to fight. And I had an education, because the people who were blacklisted were such extraordinary writers and actors, and I felt so privileged to be in their company and to learn from them what values are and what to fight for. It's ironic and terrible that in this period of the gentleman who reminds me most of Joseph McCarthy and the McCarthy Committee is our very own president. And it's not surprising, since Roy Cohn who was a kind of director and admonisher of Joe McCarthy in the same way as he was a mentor and lawyer to President Trump. The values that both men hold seem to be very, very similar. Even their approach to their audience seems to be very much is staggering to me, and I know that you wouldn't be there in that room if it wasn't staggering to you too. But I leave you with a comradely blessing that we shall see change again, and we shall overcome.
A great
The committee calls Madeline Lee Guilford.
A great friend to Lee Grant and a partner in crime was my grandmother, Madeline Lee. While she and her husband, Jack Guilford, were both blacklisted and testified, it is Madeline's testimony that has the fire of an inspired activist. Here to read the part of Madeline is her daughter, my mother, Lisa Guilford. Stage, radio, and... No, you stay here, Ma. You stay here. Oh, yes. Would you like a microphone? Yeah, here.
I want to thank Ed for inviting us all. It's really a privilege. Thank you. And I also want to say that my mother today would be 94 if she was alive. And she'd be here, and she'd still be fighting the good fight. She was hounded for 5 years to be on the House American Activities Committee, and we were on the lam. We spent every summer on Fire Island where we didn't think the subpoena server would come because they wore shoes and we didn't wear shoes. But after 5 years, they found us, and they actually served my mother in a fairly violent service where my mother ended up hitting Dolores Scotty with my brother Sam.
She swung a baby at the subpoena server.
I think she...
And Sam says when his head hit hers, he became subversive at a young age.
And I will read my mother's testimony. I'm very proud. I am a red diaper baby, as is Bobby Miller, who you'll be hearing from. We went to school together. And I just want to say, if you want to hear more of this and you're interested, my son and I and Richard Dreyfuss are making a documentary called Calling All Women. Yep. And I advise you to find it and support us because we need to get these stories out.
Morethan.movie.com.
Morethan.movie.com.
I want to introduce Leonard, the person playing Leonard Boudin here.
Boudin.
Boudin. Well, you're not there. You don't know how he liked his names. Dr. Spock, let's see here. Boudin is read by Stephen Rode, a constitutional lawyer, lecturer, writer, political activist, and past chair of the ACLU Foundation of Southern California.
Oh, wow. Hi.
You're well represented.
Thank you.
I request no pictures be taken, and I know the chairman's prior instructions, and I repeat my request.
There will be no pictures taken after the witness is sworn.
That doesn't meet my request.
Would you tell the committee, please, what formal education training you have had?
Wait. Oh, New York. I'm sorry. New York Public Schools.
Have you attended any other schools?
Do you have anything in mind?
Of course he has something in mind. He's not asking questions just for fun. I direct you to answer the question.
Excuse me, Mr. Walter. I am not here for fun either. And I have been taken away from my 3 children at considerable expense. I can't offhand recall any. I have been blacklisted for 5 years. And so these occasional roles I would be able to get, and an occasional call when Vincent Hartnett in Red Channels and Aware were not able to reach these employers with their inclusive lists. I have had a very hard time getting any occasional engagement.
Are you a member of Actors Equity, an American Federation of Television and Radio Artists?
Yes, sir. Incidentally, I agree with those witnesses that don't think that it is pertinent to this inquiry, but I am proud to be a member of those unions and to make it quite clear that they have been subverted, dominated, and infiltrated by no one. And their own membership operate these unions in a democratic fashion, and all decisions are arrived at openly and democratically, and this committee seems to be on a fishing exhibition.
You mean expedition, don't you?
No, I mean exhibition.
I guess I know who's putting on the exhibition. Now, if you would pay attention to me instead of carrying on a continuing conversation with your lawyer, maybe you would hear these questions.
I have a right to consult my lawyer, and it was not a continuing conversation.
You have no right. We are extending a privilege, and you have no right. It is a privilege that the committee extends, even though we know what the results of such conferences will be.
I don't understand that remark, Mr. Walter, and I resent it. And I would like an apology from you right now. I'm quite serious, and you are a member of the bar, as am I. I think that I am entitled to an apology for your last remark, and you know very well what I mean.
You bet I do.
I want an apology.
I think you protest too loud. You will get no apology. I want to ask you this question, Miss Lee. Did you participate in such activities?
I don't want any assumption that my attorney or anyone can dictate my answers here today, and they are dictated by my conscience and under the most severe pressure on the part of your subpoena server in an attempt to get me to deliver false testimony. And I am making the charge that this committee coerces witnesses with pressure, threats, and bribery and blackmail exercised on witnesses to cooperate with the committee. Is of no interest to this committee that this is happening. I am to take it that way.
Will you tell the committee whether or not there was a group of persons within Actors Equity or the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists composed chiefly of members of the Communist Party?
The communist label about communist groups has been stuck on anybody and everybody who organizes against the blacklist in our industry. On the basis of what I am saying here today, I will be punished, and cooperative witnesses will be rewarded. And that is not a high purpose on the part of a congressional committee.
Now that you have made your speech, will you answer my question?
I am trying to testify to the facts, but you don't seem to want them.
I submit, Mr. Chairman, she has not answered the question, and in my opinion, she is guilty of contempt, and I suggest we proceed to the next question.
I object, and I decline to answer on the basis of the First Amendment that...
Don't decline until the question is asked.
The witness is declining to the last question, and you didn't give her a chance to complete her last answer. And will you allow it to be stated for the record, if you please?
I am declining on the basis of the First Amendment, that you are prying into my personal affairs, beliefs, and opinions, and on the basis of the Fourth Amendment, that this is an illegal search and seizure of my property and deprivation by due process of the law of the only thing I have to sell in this industry, my talent and my good name. I also decline on the basis of the Eighth Amendment, that this is cruel and unusual punishment that you are inflicting without due process of law, and on the basis of the Fifth Amendment, that you may not compel me to be a witness against myself. This is like a game of tag, where you try to be as candid as possible, and 3 congressmen are standing there waiting to say, you waived your privilege. That is not fair.
You spoke of being candid. And so let me ask you a candid question. Are you a member of the Communist Party?
You know, every November I go into a little booth and I mark a secret ballot. And I prize that very highly as part of the American way of life. And I believe that that question relates strictly to that. Most people know from my public activities, and as you can see, I am a very talkative person and very willing to state my opinion, but not under compulsion and to a nefarious purpose on the part of this committee. Divulging any political belief under compulsion is not a good American principle. Is pressuring a witness so that he will not be employed a part of your congressional discretion?
I want to ask you a question.
I am asking you a question, Mr. Taverner.
She will run out of words. Let her just rant a little bit.
It is understood when she gives that answer, it means she is relying on the protection afforded people by the First and Fifth Amendments.
First, Fourth, Fifth, and Eighth Amendments. You not only want me to get out of work, but you want me to help other people get out of work. I am miscast. I am not Joan of Arc. The words recant and confessed are not exactly my dish.
Let us proceed.
How can you be looking for facts when you reward friendly witnesses and punish unfriendly witnesses? I am perfectly willing to answer all of your questions about subversive and infiltration in the entertainment industry. And the answer is, there is none.
Bravo! Thank you. Lisa Guilford playing Madeline Lee.
The witch hunters call Will Greer to testify.
Will Greer acted in plays such as Tobacco Road and in movies since 1932. In 1935, after Will directed Clifford Odets' anti-fascist play Till the Day I Die, LA Nazi sympathizers kidnapped and beat Greer. But after Will's defiant 1951 testimony to HUAC, he, like many of his talented colleagues, was blacklisted. Will went on to co-star in Salt of the Earth, the 1954 classic made by blacklisted filmmakers, and as Grandpa Walton in the 1970s hit TV series The Waltons. During the blacklist, Will created a Topanga Canyon amphitheater for himself and others banished from movies to act in. Will Greer's Theatricum Botanicum's current artistic director is Ellen Greer. Also an actress, her screen credits include Harold and Maude, Desperate Housewives, and the HBO series Room 104. And Justin Connolly, Southern California Director of Human Rights Watch, joins the HUAC Greek chorus as Republican Congressman Harold Veld. Ellen Greer reads her father Will's HUAC testimony.
Is Mr. Greer present?
Which one is the hot seat?
How are you now employed?
Well, I am unemployed at present moment. I would have been employed. This interferes with spring planting.
What was your last employment?
My last employment, I just finished a picture called The Tall Target.
Did you furnish any references to those studios in connection with your employment?
Oh, God, no, I have been in theater for about 25 years, sir. I think I'm well enough known to all of them from the roles I have played.
Were you a member of the Communist Party in 1942?
I stand on the grounds of the Fifth Amendment. Well, that might incriminate or degrade me. See, the word communist is an emotional, hysterical word of the day. It's much like the word witch in Salem.
Did you entertain at any meetings of the Communist Party or branches of the Communist Party other than the matters I have already referred to?
Oh, it's ancient history. I stand on the grounds of the Fifth Amendment.
On the grounds of the Fifth Amendment of ancient history?
Well, on the amendment, yes.
Since so much emphasis has been placed by you on the question of ancient history, are you a member of the Communist Party now?
I refuse to answer on the same grounds.
Ancient history?
No. Same grounds.
When were you in Russia?
Well, I went on a theatrical tour to see the Moscow Art Festival, 1935.
Mr. Greer, were you a member of or affiliated in any way with the American Peace Mobilization?
Well, there are about 400 or 500 organizations listed as being here, and I'd have to really consult the book to find out. It's difficult to remember the names of them. And at the present time, I play hospital benefits, I play veterans hospitals. A little group, we go around and we play veterans hospitals. For all I know, they might be listed in another 6 months as something altogether out of order. Well, things change very rapidly nowadays.
Were you at any time affiliated with the veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade?
I would decline to answer that on the same grounds, sir.
Did any producers talk to you about your activities, either within alleged activities within the Communist Party or in the Communist Front organizations?
Well, I discussed it with one director, perhaps, and he asked me just what I was anywhere, and I told him I was a conservationist. You see, that is my philosophy.
Did your employers discuss your activities with you daily?
Never in connection with employment, to the best of my knowledge. I would be quite willing to discuss it with him at any time.
More willing than you have been with this committee.
I should say no, sir, because this is a peculiar atmosphere we are living in today, and the citizen has to see clearly all the time how important it is to preserve individual rights.
Do you consider yourself to be a patriotic citizen?
Oh, I do indeed, sir. I love America. I love it enough to want to make it better.
In the event of an armed conflict in which the United States would find itself opposed to Soviet Russia, would you be willing to fight on the side of the United States?
Well, factually, I would grow vegetables for victory, for the Farm Bureau, as I did before, and I'd play hospitals. You know, it would be a wonderful idea, in fact, if they put every man my age in the front lines and you Washington fellows on the other side. I think wars would be negotiated immediately.
You have declined to answer on the ground that it might incriminate you. How?
Well, in my opinion, it is something set up outside. It is the committee set up. And you yourself, or this committee, has made these stipulations. It is something that has been set up and, to my mind, created artificially.
You think that this committee is a persecuting committee?
Oh, to my mind, there's great similarities between the Inquisition and people like in our country that have been persecuted, like Mormons.
Do you believe, Mr. Gere, that the Congress of the United States has the right to set up a committee such as this is to search out subversive activities in this country?
Oh, I'm an entertainer. I'm not a lawyer. I wouldn't know whether it would be right or not. You know, in my opinion, I think it would be much more important right now to investigate inflation and the high cost of living. That's my own opinion. You know, we all have to appear in a turkey now and again.
Now, if you are not a member of the Communist Party and have never been, do you think it would incriminate you to say so?
At this particular time, although the Communist Party is a perfectly legal one, I think they should. I'm standing on the Constitution. I believe that they're being persecuted now, like the Mormons, the Jews, the Quakers, the Masons, even radical Republicans in Lincoln's day.
Would it be any crime to admit your membership in a legal party then?
In this day of hysteria, it is, sir. We don't get the training in law that you do down in Athens, Georgia.
Then do you want to decline to answer that question as to whether or not the attorneys advised you?
I think it would be advisable, sir. I'm sorry.
All right, if you want to leave that cloud on them.
Oh, there are lots of clouds, war clouds, all sorts of clouds.
Bravo. That was Ellen Gere reading Will Gere. Is Howard Rodman, are you in the audience? Howard Rodman will speak on his father and Walter Bernstein, who was blacklisted in 1950 and wrote The Front. Howard, take it away.
Walter, who wrote The Front, is 97 years old and one of the wisest people I know. He was blacklisted for a decade and a half, during which he couldn't write anything under his own name. So in order to make a living, he used a number of fronts, some of whom were delightfully cooperative in his effort to write under another name, and some of whom, well, let's talk about that. In his memoir, Inside Out, a memoir of the Blacklist, Walter writes about his experience with a particular front named Howard. Walter, a kind and generous man, did not use the last name of his front, but I will. It's Howard Rodman Sr., my dad, and this is Walter's story about his experiences writing under my father's name. Then, once again, through the friend of a friend, I found a front. He was a talented writer named Howard who was making a name for himself writing television dramas. He was also writing plays and keeping up with the scientific literature because he was undecided whether to get the Nobel Prize for literature or for physics. He was serious about this. He would speak about it speculatively, weighing the comparative advantages. He had no scientific training, at least as far as physics went, but felt that was no hindrance. It might even be an asset. He had a maniac's assurance, although in all other respects he seemed reasonably sane. He also had a generous heart. He loaned me his name for a danger show and also for a frivolous comedy for a half-hour series my ex-agent was producing. I wrote them both too quickly, my mind on a more pressing matter of personal romance. Howard said nothing after the first show, but after the second he called and invited me to take a walk in Central Park. We walked in silence for a while, and then he said sadly that my 2 shows were not very good. I could only agree. I apologized and said I'd hoped it had not hurt his reputation, but he was not worried about his reputation. I'm worried about you, he said. He was worried about my psyche. He believed all this was doing me harm. I had written badly through being temporarily deranged by lust because I knew unconsciously that I had to write up to Howard's standard. Knowing that I couldn't, I had also acted unconsciously to prove the point. He thought that this must only continue if he fronted for me. He did not want to hurt me any further by having to write badly. Maybe I'll write better next time, I suggested. He didn't think so. The hurdle was too great. He was sorry. He should have realized what would happen. I was not, after all, Eugene O'Neill or even Arthur Miller, each of whom, I gathered, might come up to Howard's standard. But it's your reputation that will be hurt, I pointed out. It's your name on the script, not mine. He shook his head. People in the business would know they were not his scripts. They simply weren't good enough. They would think, knowing his liberal politics, that he'd done exactly what he was doing, that he'd lent his name to a blacklisted writer. What they would not know was the identity of the writer. In fact, Howard's reputation would improve, since everyone admired someone who outwitted the blacklist, especially if he took risks. By not fronting for me, he was actually making a sacrifice. He advised me to find a front on my own level or below. That way I would be unencumbered by the comparison to write as best I could. He was kind about all of this, trying not to hurt my feelings. I thanked him for what he had done while thinking seriously about burying an axe in his head. But Howard was sincere in his hatred of the blacklist. One time, he needed to do research for a project that entailed a knowledge of manual labor. A blacklisted actor friend was then working as a ditch digger in Westchester and got Howard a temporary job on his shift. By coincidence, they found themselves digging in front of the mansion of a prominent TV producer. This so outraged Howard that he began yelling at the man's house, denouncing the owner for living like this while blacklisted writers like himself were reduced to digging ditches. It took a while for his friend to calm Howard down to the point where he would accept that he was not, in fact, blacklisted. Later, Howard went to Hollywood and became a successful TV and movie writer, although the Nobel Prize continued to elude him.
And now I'd like to introduce Kenneth Levy, who has a few words to say about Bobby Lees.
Robert Lees, Bobby to all of us who knew and loved him, was a screenwriter. He was the life of the party in real life and regarding the Communist Party as well. The story of the schlemiel who walks into a room and you think someone has left. When Bobby walked into a room, everybody smiled. Everyone was glad to see him. Similarly, when the Hollywood CP needed a project done, they asked him to head it up because he was the only one that everyone in that contentious group could stand. Bobby co-wrote, I should say, with Fred Rinaldo, some of the Pete Smiths, some of the Robert Benchley shorts, Buck Privates, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. He was about 20 or 22 after the 19 who had been called. He refused to testify and was blacklisted. He asked to read a statement, which was refused. Here to read it, I'm introducing Bobby's granddaughter, my bonus daughter, Tanya Verifield.
Statement of Robert Lees filed with the clerk for the record. I believe no man who has made writing his profession can completely disassociate himself from people. He writes about them, he writes for them. They are both his inspiration and his audience. Their political freedom guarantees the necessary tools of his trade, freedom of thought and expression. I emphasize this relationship because it explains why I believe a writer must also function as a citizen. In my career as a writer, I have worked in the motion picture industry for the past 17 years, starting when I was old enough to vote. Before that, I had attended grammar and high school in San Francisco, where I was born. My parents were also native San Franciscans. In the early 30s, I moved with them to Los Angeles. The Depression ended my college career at UCLA before I could complete my freshman year. After a short experience in films as an extra and bit player, I started as a screenwriter at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. My name has been associated with over 50 short subjects for that company, mostly Robert Benchley and Pete Smith comedies. 2 of these won Academy Awards. Since then, I have received writing credit on some 15 feature films, starring such comedians as Claudette Colbert and Fred McMurray, Olsen and Johnson, Abbott and Costello. I certainly don't think I have been summoned to Washington because of these comedies. I believe I am here because in those 17 years that I have worked as a writer, I have functioned as a citizen. I firmly supported the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I joined with other writers and artists in actively campaigning for him. Being concerned with the rise of fascism in Italy, Spain, and Germany, I and others in Hollywood protested these dictatorships. During the war, I worked to better our relations with our allies. For these same reasons, I did several scripts for war bond shorts. I went to Washington and helped prepare a technical film, Substitution and Conversion, which was requested by General Somervell. The film not only played in theaters, but in shops and war plants. For these pictures, I was given a commendation by the War Department and the War Activities Committee. Since that time, since the death of President Roosevelt, I have felt a growing concern, along with many others, that our subsequent foreign policy has not been successful in achieving the peace the world fought so hard to obtain. I have been concerned with the administration's Get Tough program on one hand, and the fears of my 2 young children who tell me about the atom bomb drills they have been practicing in school. I am concerned with the loyalty oaths, the thought control, and the endless investigations which have come about because today we must believe that those who were our allies in the last war are now our enemies, and that those who were our enemies are now our friends. Because of my concern, and because I am a writer who has functioned as a citizen, this committee demands that I either conform to their dictates or be forced into silence. It is my beliefs that cause me to be summoned here. It is because of the people I may know who have shared these beliefs, people whom the committee wishes me to expose as subversive by the committee's standards, that I have been summoned here. I am asked to purge my friends and my conscience under threat of having my 17 years of work and devotion to my craft end in Blacklist. When I first decided to make writing my career, I did so because of what I felt about people. I have learned more about people and about writers and the tradition of writing since then. I know that I cannot write that war is preferable to peace, or that bigotry or conformity are virtues, or that one race or one chosen group are superior to any other and can dictate how others should live or how others should think. I cannot, because no man of integrity can successfully write what he doesn't believe. And no writer who is a true American can ever force himself to betray his citizenship and his friends, or write the kind of material that will be forced upon the American people if this committee has its way.
Wow. Wow. I second that. And Richard Dreyfuss, your Uber is here, I believe. You should go grab your luggage from my car and get your Uber. And if you own a white Celica, your lights are on. Paul Jericho wrote Tom, Dick, and Harry and produced Salt of the Earth. Tonight, in particular, we are thinking of Paul. I wasn't joking, see, there he goes. Tonight, in particular, we are thinking of Paul. Here to read another statement HUAC didn't want to hear is Paul's son, Bill Jericho.
My father was an incurable optimist, and you should see if you can detect that in this rather gloomy excerpt. Today, freedom and America are no longer synonymous. The miracle of being able to think freely, speak freely, write freely, meet freely, no more. Do so, and you lose your job. Do so, and you're smeared as subversive. Do so, and you go to jail. The miracle has become a mirage. You look around today, and you see Americans afraid to open their mouths, or opening them only to purge themselves, only to perjure themselves, only to inform on their friends, consider it, in the land of the free, the home of the brave. Why? Because we are threatened by communism, we are told. To protect our liberties, we must give up our liberties. To preserve morality, we must abandon morality. To prevent war, we must prepare for war. To stop aggression, we must embark on aggression. What fantastic nonsense. What is communism? Are we allowed to discuss it? Is it a militant form of socialism? Does it require war by its very nature? Is it the opposite of freedom? Are we allowed to debate it? What is capitalism? Was it once progressive? Is it now decadent? Does it need a war economy in order to survive? Are we allowed to say so? No, for it is not our loyalty to our country that is being judged, but our loyalty to the particular economic system that prevails here. And that is the biggest lie of all, that capitalism and democracy are somehow the same thing. That it's un-American to stand for a social change. I am proud of my beliefs. I am proud of my affiliations. I'll be damned, though, if I'll disclose them to my enemies to be used against my friends.
Thank you. Is Norma Barsman in attendance? Norma Barsman? There she is. Screenwriter and author Norma Barsman is one of our Blacklist survivors and co-initiator of tonight's historic remembrance. To avoid HUAC, Norma lived in exile for decades with screenwriter Ben Barsman and their family. Norma eventually returned stateside and wrote the books The Red and the Blacklist and The End of Romance. And now she'll say a few words.
Okay, I'm there. Greetings, everybody. Yeah, I need. Okay. Well, I'm speaking for two blacklisted screenwriters. Myself, Norma Barsman, 97. And for my husband, Ben Barsman, the boy with green hair, El Cid, and many other wonderful movies. He died in 1989. But this is not going to be sad, what I'm about to tell you. This is a jolly story. On an unseasonably hot day in 1949, Ben came home early from MGM, where he was working on Alana Turner. He joined me on the front lawn of our home, 1290 Sunset Plaza Drive, to wait for our 3-year-old daughter and our 2-year-old son to return from the beach. All at once, a very beautiful girl in a very beautiful car turned into our driveway. She got out quickly, mumbled, "I felt I ought to tell you. A sheriff's car is parked at the bottom of your hill, and the sheriff asks everyone if they're going to 1290, your house. I thought you ought to know." I thanked her and held out my hand. "My name is Norma," I said. She shook my hand. "So is mine," she said. I'm on my way to the Minnellis, and left. 2 years later in Paris, we saw her photo on the advertisement of a film. She was, of course, Marilyn Monroe. After she left, the phone rang. Director Bernard Voorhouse, who lived with his family up the hill from us, said, "They're serving subpoenas today. Why don't we change houses? Why don't we exchange houses?" "Okay," said my husband. They had a pool. The next day, when two FBI chicks came to 1290 Sunset Plaza Drive with a subpoena for Ben, Bernard Voorhouse said, "I am not Ben Barsman," and they left. When the two FBI guys came to us with a subpoena for Bernie, Ben said, "I am not Bernard Voorhouse," and showed them out. Well, clearly the time had come to leave. I convinced my mother to come with us to France and helped her pack. Can you hear me? The super chief to New York, the Algonquin overnight. Mother stayed with the two children while Ben and I saw Death of a Salesman with Lee J. Cobb, who later denounced us. Next day, Queen Mary to London and Christ in Concrete, Eddie Dimitrick directing. After the film, Eddie went back to the States to jail, and when he got out, he named us. Ben wrote the screenplay, and he never got paid. And Sam Wanamaker, who was in London because he too was blacklisted, starred in it. It's very good. We got, let's see. Oh, we got a call from the United States to England to Ben, from Ben's agent. He said, "Don't come back." So we went on to France. For 5 years, I wrote a lot of American TV with a pseudonym. And Ben began to work at European Pictures. In 1951, my mother died at the American Hospital in Paris. When I came out of her room, I saw our good friend, director John Berry, also a blacklisted exile, sitting on the floor of the corridor of the American Hospital in Paris. I said, "But Jack, you hardly knew my mother." Between tears and sobs, Jack Berry said, "I'm crying for all of us." In 1951, the U.S. Embassy took my passport. I couldn't go anywhere. Of course, I had the children with me. Ben was born in Canada, became a U.S. citizen. The U.S. State Department took away his American citizenship, but he did not get his Canadian back automatically. Not at all. He was stateless. A most wonderful thing for the French. They thought stateless was... The French gave him papers that showed that he was stateless, sans nationalité, and could travel everywhere with no passport. I told you this was a jolly story. So well, let's stop that. Me, I didn't write, I didn't travel, I didn't anything. I bought and furnished 2 beautiful houses with beautiful antiques and encouraged 7 beautiful children. In 1958, by act of the U.S. Superior Court, they gave me back my passport and gave Ben back his citizenship. Soon after Ben got his citizenship, the IRS wrote Ben asking for back taxes for the years from 1951 to 58 when he wasn't a citizen. He replied with the F word. I wrote an original screenplay, Finishing School, which Bernard Voorhaus made in Rome at Cinecittà. Joe Losi directed a film in Italy, which Ben wrote for Paul Muni. Paul Muni actually came to Italy to be nice because we were all blacklisted. So the two films were made in Italy, and my sister's Italian husband reported their doings to the American Embassy in Rome. Losi and Voorhaus had to run for it to England. I'm telling you this, yes, it was my brother-in-law who did it. Okay, May 68 brought me back to life. I wrote a play about it, which Simone Signoret said was too American for the French and too French for the Americans. So we returned to the United States in 1978 after 28 years abroad. Hollywood was very different. Everybody was gone. I went back to newspaper writing, which I had done in the beginning. I had a column in the Herald Examiner. And then Ben and I began to write a number of scripts together that were never made. One was finally going to be made by Joe Losi. It was just starting to casting in England when Joe died, and then Ben died. After Ben was dead, I palled around with glorious, marvelous, brilliant, funny Abe Polanski. One night at dinner, he suddenly got very angry at me for telling funny stories about it all. He said, "Why the hell don't you write it?" And I did, so I wrote The Red and the Blacklist. Well, why am I telling you all this? Because writers live in the world. What we write is influenced by what's happening in the world. And what is happening in the world is influenced by what we write. There is a great deal we can do and must do to make a better world, especially now. Okay, that's all. That's all. All right? Okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Miss Barsman. Don't just stand there, do something. That was beautiful. Guillaume, are you in the house? Mr. LeBeau, paging Mr. LeBeau. Red and Blue is about how Hollywood movies, well, I'll let him tell you, were dissident talents completely silenced by the Inquisition in Hollywood? Here is French filmmaker Guillaume LeBeau to present a clip from his new documentary, Red and Blue, never before shown in America. Yep. Anytime, guys.
Hi again. So we are very pleased to show you a clip from the movie we made with called Red and Blue, which is talking about the representation of the Russian Revolution of 1917 in Hollywood movies. It's a movie for French TV originally, but you have, of course, an English version in which you will show Ed Rumpel talking about the Blacklist, which is a small part of the movie, of course. And we are here, so we would like to tell you that we are currently shooting a new documentary about the difficult relationship between Donald Trump and Hollywood. Difficult relationship. We are in Los Angeles until the end of next week. So if you are interested to participate in the movie and appear on French TV, feel free to go to see us, and we will be very glad to see you. So
in France, we have just 3 words for resume democracy: liberté, égalité, fraternité. And in Hollywood, you have 1 word for tell liberty, democracy. This word is cinéma. Merci beaucoup. Merci Ed. Merci à tous de nous accueillir. Merci.
And let's take a look at this clip.
The Cold War hysteria in the movies, it's a very interesting thing because there were a number of movies that came out in the 1950s that were just made fun of by the Coen brothers in a film called Hail Caesar with George Clooney. But these really rabidly, very on-the-nose, anti-communist movies, like something like I Married a Communist for the FBI or stuff like that, they weren't very successful. People didn't go see these overtly anti-communist films. What were successful were those movies, such as The Invasion of the Body Snatcher, that took the anti-communist hysteria and put it within the sci-fi genre or other movie genres. For example, in Body Snatchers, the pod people repeat slogans that sound as if they're straight out of stereotypical Stalinist handbooks.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Are there revolutionary messages in movies such as Spartacus and Planet of the Apes? The answer is absolutely yes. First of all, who wrote them? The novel Spartacus was written by Howard Fast, who had been a member of the Communist Party USA. The screenplay for Spartacus was written by a man who had been a member of the Communist Party, Dalton Trumbo. But at the end of Spartacus, I mean, it's a beautiful scene. Human solidarity. We're going to stick together, which is what socialism's all about. Solidarity, sticking together. But it's more than that. At the end, it's like the whole thing in the Hollywood Blacklist. Will you be an informer? Will you name names? We want to get the real Spartacus. And Tony Curtis and then all the other gladiators and revolutionaries stand up in what must have been the dream of Dalton Trumbo at the time. And they say, I'm Dalton Trumbo. Actually, they say, I'm Spartacus. But you could imagine that the members of the Hollywood 10 wanted the masses of people that they had fought for, their union rights, their benefits.
Hollywood loves to make movies about failed revolutions. So even back in the 1930s, you have a number of films about the Mexican Revolution. You have Marlon Brando and Viva Zapata, also a failed revolution. And Spartacus, also a failed revolution. But the lesson is revolutions will fail.
In Planet of the Apes, Michael Wilson was one of the great screenwriters of the Hollywood Reds. He co-wrote Oscar-winning films, Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia, and he couldn't use his name. And in Planet of the Apes, by that time, I guess that was in the late 60s, he was able to use his name. And you know that there's a scene in there, there's a court, and it's all like dialogue taken from the Hollywood Blacklist. You could almost hear them saying, "Are you now?" or "Have you ever been an ape?" A member of the ape party. And so they very deliberately put their politics into different genres. So you could see that when they had the chance, they would express their politics, but often in very creative and filmic ways.
How very Eisenstein at that ending there. Thanks, guys. We are going to take a break. Can you believe it? It's the intermission already. I bet all of you are very excited to get out there. But before we do that, we want to have our opera singer, KB Solomon, come up here to perform an a cappella of Paul Robeson's signature song.
Thank you. As Paul would say, an artist must elect to fight for freedom or for slavery. I have made my choice. I had no alternative. There's an old man called Mississippi. That's the old man that I don't like to be. What does he care if the world's got trouble? What does he care if the land ain't free? Old Man River, that old man river, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling. He keeps on rolling along. He don't plant taters, he don't plant cotton, and them that plants him is soon forgotten. But Old Man River, he just keeps rolling along. You and me, we sweat and strain, body all aching and racked with pain. Tote that barge, lift that bill, you show a little grit, and you land in jail. I keeps laughing instead of crying. I must keep fighting until I'm dying. But Old Man River, he just keeps rolling along. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. Bless you.
Wow. That was amazing. And now let's have a 10-minute intermission. And Swing Inc. is playing in the lobby. And, of course, I'll remind you that copies of the documentary Red and Blue are still available in the lobby for sale. Come back, y'all. Thank you all so much for sticking with it. I'm sure that the hearings were more painful than this, so you all consider yourselves lucky that this is the extent of it. I want to see if I can get Bobby Miller to come up here and read a very special letter that his father wrote to the committee that has never before been published or heard. So that's going to be something fantastic. Is Bobby in the house? Yeah, well, it thinned out a bit. They got blacklisted. Yeah, my mother is hurting. My mother is hurting them. Come on, everybody. Don't hurry, but hurry. Where are you? Where's your intro? Where's his intro? You know what that is? Thank you.
Middle of 75.
74, 75.
Yeah. Oh, so it's number 3. You got it? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh, here's the intro. All right, are we getting close? Yes. Oh, yes. I see. There we have Marcia. Don't please take your time. We don't need anybody rushing. I don't know if anybody knows what a remarkable person our living legend here is, Marcia. We gave her a happy birthday, and it was all very quick, but what she's done in her life is really amazing, and what she's done since. So I encourage you all to watch this documentary or to search out more information on our living legend. Yes. Oh, my goodness. Talk about PR whores. It's believed that a major reason why HUAC summoned playwright Arthur Miller in 1956 is they wanted to meet his then-wife, Marilyn Monroe. Miller, of course, is our American Shakespeare, who wrote classics such as Death of a Salesman. Here to read a special letter his father wrote to the committee is Arthur's son, Bobby Miller. You ready now, Bobby? Now you can dim the lights.
I gotta switch glasses. So this was a letter that Dad wrote. This was a letter Dad wrote to the Honorable Francis E. Walter, Chairman of the House Committee on American Activities. My dear Mr. Walter, I'm informed by my attorneys that at times in the past the House Committee on Un-American Activities has refrained from citing witnesses for contempt under circumstances not very different from those obtaining in my hearing. I would therefore like to present to your committee certain considerations which have moved me to decline the naming of those few people I recall as having been present at the meetings of the communist writers which I attended in 1947. I write here in the same spirit with which I entered the hearing room. I believed then, and I believe yet, that my own candor in speaking of my past associations is my best defense, for I know myself to be a person devoted to democratic institutions and opposed to totalitarianism, And the record of my work and my life, looked at as a whole, must, I believe, stand as proof of this. The meetings in question, next page. Excuse me 1 second. As proof, forgive me here, folks, my glasses. Stand as proof of this. For 20 years now, I have spent the better part of every day forming and testing my vision of man and society, my sense of what is truly going on in the world around me. For a play such as I write has no force, if not the force of evident truth. These plays speak my deepest feelings and are the most complete and unmitigated expressions of my viewpoints toward every kind of social manifestation and institution. In the profoundest sense, therefore, these plays are myself, for good or for ill, and I have not the slightest doubt that they are both humane and democratic works which could not have been written excepting by one devoted to the democratic hope for man and that concept of his nature. If now, by virtue of my willingness or unwillingness to answer a single question about the identity of certain other writers, and by this sudden standard my whole character and citizenship are to be judged, then it means to me that the labor of revelation lasting over 20 years is brought down to nothing in a single moment, and the daily struggle I have waged to speak clearly in the most public of public places, the American stage, is altogether mocked. Had I hidden my opinions and my views, my sense of reality and my apprehensions for my fellow men, and written trivia in the common commerce of the stage, I should perhaps feel differently. Or had I sold my talent for security, as I could have done 100 times. But I have gladly risked everything, time and again, for the freedom our stage blessedly permits, that freedom to expose my thoughts untrammeled and unhired. Now to have to prove my fidelity to freedom, an idea which the heart of my works is dedicated, would be an action in travesty of my labor itself. If I must be judged, let me be judged by what my native impulses led me to do rather than what necessity now makes opportune. If in truth I have done evil, the naming of others surely cannot mitigate that evil or erase it, and the refusal to name them cannot make that evil worse than it was. Nor can I believe that such a willingness betokens in itself respect for the Congress, or that in this instance unwillingness is a mark of disrespect, let alone contempt. As I have done, so I do now, resting my case not upon protections of the law, but on the spontaneous revelations in my works and on the record of my life. I cannot confess another man, therefore, and I ask the committee to consider where true respect lies in such a case and where contempt. It is no news to the world that there are words of agreement and assent which, in truth, demean, and conscientious reservations which magnify the dignity of the state. Respectfully yours, Arthur Miller.
The committee calls Lillian Hellman.
Radio and TV commentator Ellen Ratner is the sister of the late Michael Ratner, president of the Center for Constitutional Rights. Ellen is one of Fox News' few lefty pundits. Here she reads Lillian Hellman's letter to HUAC, which was read during her hearing on May 21st, 1952 by the committee's chairman.
I'm also Bill Jericho, who was Paul Jericho's son's cousin as well. So there's a connection. So, Mr. Wood, as you know, I am under subpoena to appear before your committee on May 21st, 1952. I am most willing to answer all questions about myself. I have nothing to hide from your committee, and there's nothing in my life which I am ashamed. I have been advised by counsel that under the Fifth Amendment, I have a constitutional privilege to decline to answer any questions about my political opinions, activities, associations, on the grounds of self-incrimination. I do not wish to claim this privilege. I am ready and willing to testify before the representatives of our government as to my own opinions and my own actions, regardless of any risks or consequences to myself. But I am advised by counsel that if I answer the committee's questions about myself, I must also answer questions about other people, and that if I refuse to do so, I can be cited for contempt. My counsel tells me that if I answer questions about myself, I will have waived my rights under the Fifth Amendment and could be forced legally to answer questions about others. This is very difficult for a layman to understand. But there is one principle I do understand. I am not willing, now or in the future, to bring bad troubles to people who, in my past association with them, were completely innocent of any talk or action that was disloyal or subversive. I do not like subversion or disloyalty in any form. And if I had ever seen any, I would have considered it my duty to have reported it to the proper authorities. But to hurt innocent people whom I knew many years ago in order to save myself, to me is inhuman and indecent and dishonorable. I cannot and will not cut my conscience to fill this year's fashions. Even though I long ago came to the conclusion that I was not a political person and could have no comfortable place in any political group. I was raised in an old-fashioned American tradition, and there were certain homely things that were taught to me to try and tell the truth, not to bear false witness, not to harm my neighbor, to be loyal to my country, and so on. In general, I respected these ideals of Christian honor and did as well with them as I knew how. It is my belief that you will agree with these simple rules of human decency and will not expect me to violate the good American tradition from which they spring. I would therefore like to come before you and speak of myself. I am prepared to waive the privilege against self-incrimination and to tell you everything you wish to know about my views or actions if your committee will agree to refrain from asking me to name other people. If the committee is unwilling to give me this assurance, I will be forced to plead the privilege of the Fifth Amendment at the hearing. A reply to this letter would be greatly appreciated. Sincerely yours, Lillian Hellman. There was a question I think you're supposed to ask me. Oh, okay.
And now for one of tonight's highlights, a family reunion that proves sisterhood is powerful. Lionel Stander appeared on stage, radio, TV, and in 80 movies, including Frank Capra's 1936 Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, the original 1937 A Star is Born, and Sergio Leone's 1968 Once Upon a Time in the West. Due to his distinctive raspy voice and tough guy demeanor, the Bronx-born Stander played heavies in such movies as 1937's The Last Gangster with Edward G. Robinson, Roman Polanski's 1966 Cul-de-sac, and 1971's The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight with Robert De Niro. Lionel played Max, the chauffeur butler in the TV detective series Heart to Heart. Stander belonged to the Hollywood Anti-Fascist League and raised money for the Spanish Loyalists, the Scottsboro Boys, and striking farm workers. As a joke, he whistled the Internationale while waiting for an elevator in 1938's No Time to Marry. Ironically, off-screen, Stander actually had time to marry 6 wives at different times and had as many daughters. Here, for the first time ever, 5 of Lionel's daughters have been brought together, united by our tribute. Author Eric Bentley described Lionel Stander's HUAC testimony as fierce, if not a performance for his life, the performance of his life. To do justice to their father's fiery words, it will take no less than 5 readers, his defiant daughters, to read them. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to, let me get through all of them, Jennifer Stander, a producer living in LA, Ava Stander, a writer living in LA, Bella Stander, a writer and publisher in Rhinebeck, New York, Joy Powers DeVideo, a social justice activist and pioneering figure in the San Francisco Bay Area food community, and Michael Carter, a retired attorney and Miami police sergeant living in Melbourne Beach, Florida. The five daughters will now jointly read Lionel Stander's HUAC testimony.
So we've edited down excerpts from his testimony because there was a lot of gavel pounding and arguing and interrupting. I think it is very desirous to the American people to know about everything that was happening here. Because just to have my name appear in association with this committee, it's like the Spanish Inquisition. You may not be burned, but you can't help coming away a little singed. Well, I am more than willing to cooperate. I don't know about the overthrow of the government. This committee has been investigating 15 years so far and hasn't even found one act of violence. I know of some subversion, and I can help the committee if it is really interested. I know of a group of fanatics who are desperately trying to undermine the Constitution of the United States by depriving artists and others of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness without due process of law. If you're interested in that, I would like to tell you all about it. I can tell names, and I can cite instances, and I am one of the first victims of it. And if you are interested in that, and also a group of ex-Bundists, America Firsters, and anti-Semites, people who hate everybody, including Negroes, minority groups, and most likely themselves. And these people are engaged in the conspiracy outside all the legal processes to undermine our very fundamental American concepts upon which our entire system of jurisprudence exists.
I just want to thank you all for the honor of being here. I'd love to imitate my father's voice, but the first time I did that, my mother took me to the doctor thinking I had a sore throat, so I'll just have to do it in my own voice. You said you would like me to cooperate with you in your attempt to unearth subversive activities. I know of such subversive activities. I began to tell you about them. And I am shocked by your cutting me off. You don't seem to be interested in the sort of subversive activities I know about. I am not a dupe, or a dope, or a mo, or a schmo. And everything I did, I was absolutely conscious of what I was doing, and I am not ashamed of everything I said in public or private. And I am very proud of my war record, my private record as a citizen, and my public record as an entertainer. I would like the record to show I am not charged with being a member of the Communist Party. I am not charged with lying under oath because I have made continuous oaths to various governmental agencies. You are not charging me with being a communist, right? I just want that clear. I haven't been accused of anything. I want that very straight, because through newspaper headlines, people get peculiar attitudes. Mere appearance here, not just appearance, the mere fact in my case that I was subpoenaed is tantamount to being blacklisted, because people say, what is an actor doing in front of the Un-American Activities Committee? I want to state right now, I was not trying to be smart or funny. I have never been more deadly serious in my life. If anything I said seemed humorous or funny, I assure you it was purely coincidental and doesn't mirror what I deeply feel. Because my entire career and the respect of my fellow artists and the American people is at stake. I am not trying to be funny or put on a show. If I did, I would have the lights on.
I swore under oath before this committee in 1940, and I was not a member of the Communist Party. I also swore in 1940 before the Los Angeles grand jury, its district attorney, and I forced my way in there. I was a voluntary witness, and the district attorney's bureau saw fit to clear me and released a statement to the press absolving me of any participation whatsoever. And the grand jury also cleared me of the charges made before them. So, I've already been cleared by the district attorney, and the grand jury said I was a fine, patriotic American citizen. I have sworn under oath, and if any of these charges be true, why haven't I been indicted? I don't want to be responsible for a whole stable of informers, stool pigeons, and psychopaths, and ex-political heretics who come in here beating their chest and say, I'm awfully sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, I want absolution. Get me back into pictures. And they will do anything. They will name anybody, and they will go to any extent necessary to get back into pictures. Therefore, I decline to answer that question. Because it clearly is not relevant to the purpose of this committee, and it violates my rights under the First and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution of the United States. And incidentally, don't give me the routine about hiding, because I find the only people who hide behind immunity are the witnesses, the stool pigeons used here. My estimation of this committee is that this committee arrogates judicial and punitive powers which it does not possess.
My record is absolutely clear. How many times do I have to swear under oath before governmental agencies? And how many times do you have to use my name to get headlines? I have already sworn under oath that I am not now a member of the Communist Party. And I swore in 1940 I was never a member of the Communist Party and never will be. And I would have to be pretty stupid if I swore that in 1940 and know the FBI automatically gets copies of every complaint that I joined the Communist Party later. I would have to be a complete idiot. This is a terribly disgraceful experience to go through. To be brought here because of these insinuations and accusations, and something you won't dare charge me with. This committee says I am not charged with anything, yet you are trying to trick me into depriving me of my constitutional rights. You know I swore under oath. If there was any real evidence to refute my sworn testimony, I would be indicted. I wouldn't be brought here before this committee. And it's 2 years. 2 years since I have requested an appearance, during which
this fanatic group of subversives have blacklisted artists and are attempting to impose censorship on the free theater that we all believe in and love. And you people are, in a way, instrumental in aiding them.
I have freedom of belief. You, as congressmen, uphold the Constitution, and you know the federal judges have said that whenever a congressional committee trespasses upon areas from which it's forbidden to, that it is the duty and right of the citizen to avail themselves of this privilege. I decline under the First Amendment, which entitles me to freedom of belief, under the Fifth Amendment, which states that I will not be forced to testify against myself, and also in which there is no inference of guilt. It is designed to protect the innocent. And under the Ninth Amendment, which gives me other rights. For instance, the right to get up in the Union Hall, which I did, and introduce a resolution condemning this congressional committee for its abuse of powers in attempting to impose censorship upon the American theater. I decline to answer under my constitutional right, which I am proud of, and I resent the inference here that anyone who uses it, which our forefathers fought for, is guilty of anything. You know this is an ancient right of the American people. Unfortunately, in feudal Spain, my ancestors didn't have the protection of this. They didn't have the protection of the United States Constitution, and they were religious refugees. I have done a little research on this since you called me. And the first experience of it was, and I am not being sacrilegious, was when Jesus Christ was asked by Pontius Pilate, "These judges have a lot of witnesses against you," and he said nothing. By inference and accusation, you accuse me, because you know this committee can't charge me with anything. You have no judicial power. Your purpose is investigative, and I can't see how any of these questions can aid the committee in its legal purpose, which is to recommend legislation.
Hi, folks. Well, the committee has to wrap tonight at 11:30, and we have a lot to get through. So I want to beg anyone who is coming up here to be brief. Feel free to cut your testimony in half so that we can get to everybody tonight. There are young children at home waiting to be fed. I implore you. With that, I introduce Margot Pepper, who hopefully will say a few words, and then introduce someone of lovely surprise who will also say a few words. He doesn't have to cut his bit, but I'm hoping that Margot can keep it brief. Thank you so much.
That's a tall order for me to keep it brief, but I will try. I'm author Margot Pepper. The Blacklist supposedly began to disintegrate on January 20th, 1960, with director Otto Preminger's announcement that blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo would receive full credit for the script of his film Exodus. But in reality, for others, like my father, George Pepper, the blacklist is still in place. My father produced 4 movies in the 1950s. 2 were directed by Spanish film icon Luis Buñuel. But in the U.S., George's name does not appear on a single film. In Mexico and France, however, where there was no blacklist, my father's films are listed correctly. James Travers, in a 2013 review for filmdefrance.com, stated that my father's The Young One was in many respects Buñuel's most remarkable film. Although bizarrely, it is often omitted from discussions of his work and remains his most neglected and underrated film. Primarily, it is a film which condemns racial prejudice and was ahead of its time. It was particularly ill-received in America, where the narrow-minded bigotry of some prominent critics consigned it to almost immediate oblivion. Buñuel referred to my father as his favorite producer and fondly remembered his close friend in his memoir, My Last Sigh. Hugo Butler, who wrote the 4 films my father produced, had his credits restored by the Writers Guild of America when the WGA and 3 other talent guilds publicly apologized for their role in the Blacklist in 1997, an effort spearheaded by Paul Jericho. However, my repeated attempts to restore my father's name have been ignored by the Motion Picture Association of America, the Producers Guild, IMDb, and Wikipedia. George P. Worker, the nom de plume he used to earn a living after he was blacklisted, a violin prodigy beginning at age 4, Georgie Pepper made headlines. But by 24, he developed repetitive strain injury, which ended his violin career. He turned to politics, and under his leadership as executive secretary of HICASP, the organization became the major outpost of progressivism west of the Hudson River. In 1951, George fled to Mexico City with his wife, Jeanette Pepper, to dodge subpoenas. Their community of resistance at one time or another included Cleo and Dalton Trumbo, Ring Lardner Jr., Miguel Covarrubias, it goes on, I'll skip. While in exile, my parents' mail was read and some seized, including royalty payments from the States. Friends Sam Novick and Max Schlafrock were illegally kidnapped by the FBI. In Mexico, my father met Buñuel. George introduced his friend and screenwriter Hugo Butler to Buñuel, and under the guise of his company, Olmec Productions, he made The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, Los Pequeños Gigantes, Torero, and The Young One. Hopefully you can go online and see the dates and translations that I cut out. My father never brought the return portion of his ticket to Mexico. His ashes were scattered in the park I played in across the street from our apartment when I was 7. As part of their retrospective on Latino film culture in Los Angeles, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences has restored The Little Giants for a showing November 18th at 2 o'clock. And for the first time, we'll announce my father's true name. It still doesn't restore his name officially. That's up to the Producers Guild, who didn't have a union, I guess. But like Ed Rampell, like his event tonight, it will shine a spotlight on George Pepper's position on that 70-year-old blacklist. That blacklist itself will truly be over when corporate radio, television, books, Hollywood movies, and now sports teams, as reflected by blackballed former 49er Colin Kaepernick, stop censoring voices that reflect the politics and economic interests of our multiracial 99%. And when all blacklisted victims get hired, published, or their names restored on their work, including my father, George Pepper.
All right. Oh. Thank you. That is wonderful.
Margot, your glasses. Raphael Pepper Clark has published articles since age 7 in Canada's The Scoop, Berkeley Times, and Street Spirit. Fluent in Spanish, the 8th grader plays horn in the Longfellow Mariachi Band and likes memes. Today is his birthday. Here, Raphael discusses his grandfather, George Pepper.
My name is Raphael Pepper Clark. I'm the grandson of George Pepper, a blacklisted producer and organizer. Today, October 27, 2017, happens to be the 70th anniversary of the beginning of the resistance to the blacklist, the day people refused to snitch out their friends at the HUAC hearings. I was born on this day 13 years ago, and like my grandparents, I've never snitched. Even if it meant I'd get in trouble myself. My grandpa did the same to avoid naming names, and the consequence was having to move to Mexico. Then he was blacklisted, so he stayed there. Ironically, just like my age today, the blacklist lasted 13 years until Otto Preminger agreed that Trumbo should put his name on the movie Exodus, but not for my grandfather. He still doesn't have his name on his movies. They list George P. Worker as the producer instead of George Pepper. Recently, for the first time, I saw a movie he produced called Los Pequeños Gigantes, or The Little Giants. The Little Giants was about a poor Little League baseball team from Mexico without many resources. They came to the U.S. to play baseball in the World Series. All odds were against them, and they still managed to win the championship. I think the reason George chose to make the film was because the Little Giants were like the resistance to the blacklist. Although there were many obstacles, such as the government being against the resistance and preventing them from getting jobs, they still succeeded and ended the blacklist. Like the Little Giants, they kept trying, and all their hard work paid off and won the battle, except for my grandfather. I was frustrated because the movie is in Spanish, and although I speak it, because of the sound quality, I could barely understand it. I was glad to hear that the Academy of Motion Pictures has made a new version of the movie. I was proud because my grandfather produced this and other movies, because it's amazing to see a film he produced 60 years later with 370,000 views on YouTube, and the young one with 676,000 views on YouTube as well. But sadly, because he was blacklisted, he had to put George P. Worker on his films instead of George Pepper. All those people have watched his movie, and without even knowing he really produced them. I think this is unfair. He put all his work into his movies and couldn't even get his real name on them. If it wasn't for the blacklist and my grandfather having to move to Mexico, more people could have watched the movie and it could have been more popular. And my grandfather would be recognized for what he did, just like anyone else. He deserves his real name on his movies. Just because he was in favor of peace and free speech, healthcare and education for everyone, he shouldn't have been blacklisted and forced to move to another country. We should protect these beliefs nowadays, especially with Trump in office, trying to take away these rights.
Right on. All right. Hey, this is not a political event, remember? Yes, let's give credit where credit is due. Anytime you see a George Pepper film misnamed, I want you to make sure you put in the comments the correct producer. Let's just make that a sort of a meme that goes forward. Laura Bressler, the great niece of actress Minerva Pius, reads Minerva's listing of the subversive organizations and causes she was purportedly involved in, with, according to Red Channels, the report of communist influence in radio and television. Laura Bressler.
Hi, I'm very pleased to be here. My great-aunt Minerva Pius was a radio actress who was a star on the Fred Allen radio show. And if you were around in the 40s and you listened to the radio, you would have known her. She was listed in Red Channels, which effectively curtailed her career. She left the country for England and then France, avoiding a subpoena. And she was the New York president of what was then AFRA, which is now AFTRA. This was pre-television. So my Aunt Minnie was famous as Mrs. Nussbaum, Mrs. Pansy Nussbaum on the Fred Allen Show, and he would come to say hello to her, and she would say things like, "You was expecting maybe Emperor Shapirohito." These were her taglines, and in those days, we had a different kind of consciousness, and that was pretty funny. So in red channels, she was listed as an actress in radio, and her heinous activities were reported as American Youth for Democracy. That's terrible. National sponsor, Artists Front to Win the War, also pretty bad. A sponsor, Stage for Action, a member of the Advisory Council. Excuse me. Veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, premature anti-fascist, as an entertainer. Civil Rights Congress, and the list goes on. National Council for the Arts and Sciences and Professions. And as a member of that group, a signer in an open letter denouncing the motion picture producers for their shocking and degrading capitulation to the discredited and irresponsible House Un-American Activities Committee. Thank you, sirs. And for the end, you was expecting maybe Cecil B. Schlemiel. That's my Aunt Minnie.
Thank you so much, Laura. Pete Seeger was a renowned folk singer and lifelong progressive. He is not here tonight, but here to read Pete's testimony is Salam al-Marayati, president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Hollywood is not only notorious for blacklisting, but for typecasting. Here, playing against type, is Hector Villagra, executive director at the ACLU of Southern California, portraying HUAC Congressman Gordon H. Schur.
What is your occupation?
Well, I have worked at many things, and my main profession is a student of American folklore. And I make my living as a banjo picker, sort of a damning in some people's opinion.
You say that you were in the armed forces of the United States.
I went in July of 1942.
And upon your return from the service in December of 1945, you continued in your profession?
I continued singing, and I expect I always will.
I have before me a photostatic copy of the June 20th, 1947 issue of the Daily Worker. In a column entitled, "What's On?" appears this advertisement. Tonight, Bronx. Hear Peter Seeger and his guitar at Allerton Section housewarming. May I ask you whether or not the Allerton Section was a section of the Communist Party?
Sir, I refuse to answer that question, whether it was a quote from the New York Times or the Vegetarian Journal. I am not going to answer any questions as to my associations, my philosophical or religious beliefs, or my political beliefs, or how I voted in any election or any of these private affairs. I think these are very improper questions for any American to be asked, especially under such compulsion as this. I feel that in my whole life, I have never done anything of any conspiratorial nature, and I resent very much and very deeply the implication of being called before this committee that in some way, because my opinions may be different from yours, that I am any less of an American than anybody else. I love my country very deeply, sir.
Why don't you make a little contribution towards preserving its institutions?
I feel that my whole life is a contribution. This is why I would like to tell you about it.
I don't want to hear about it. I direct you to answer the question.
I have already given you my answer, sir.
Let me understand. You're not relying on the Fifth Amendment, are you?
No, sir. Although I do not want to in any way discredit or depreciate or depredate the witnesses that have used the Fifth Amendment, and I simply feel it is improper for this committee to ask such questions, I feel they are immoral to ask any American this kind of question.
I assume then that you heard me read the testimony of Mr. Kazan about the purpose of the Communist Party in having its actors, entertainers for the benefit of communist fronts and the Communist Party. I want to know whether or not you were engaged in a similar type of service to the Communist Party in entertaining at these features.
I have sung for Americans of every political persuasion, and I am proud that I never refused to sing to an audience, no matter what religion or color of their skin or situation of life. I have sung in hobo jungles, and I have sung for the Rockefellers, and I am proud that I have never refused to sing for anybody. That is the only answer I can give along that line.
I hand you a photograph which was taken on the May Day parade in New York City in 1952, which shows the front rank of a group of individuals, and one is in a uniform with a military cap and insignia and carrying a placard entitled "Censored." Is that photograph of you?
It is like Jesus Christ when asked by Pontius Pilate, "Are you the king of the Jews?" I say, let someone else identify it.
We are not accepting the answers or the reasons you gave.
That is your prerogative, sir.
Do you understand it's the feeling of the committee that you are in contempt as a result of the positions you take?
I can't say. I am telling you, I hate to waste the committee's time, but I think surely you must realize by now that my answer is the same, that is the position of the committee. I love my country very dearly, and I greatly resent this implication that because some of the places that I have sung and some of the people that I have known and some of my opinions, whether they are religious or philosophical, or it might be a vegetarian, making me any less of an American. Thank you. Just want to say, as an American Muslim, I'm very proud to be standing on the shoulders of great giants, of champions of justice like all of you. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you. Thank you.
As we've seen tonight, women played a key role in resisting HUAC. Helen Levitt was one of these strong women. Once they were blacklisted, Helen and her husband Al Levitt co-wrote TV sitcoms using pen names. They were also involved in the teaching and mentoring of young writers, including a black writers group run by Helen that graduated a generation of highly successful African-American screen and TV writers, bringing much-needed diversity to the industry. The new novel, The Wire Recorder, by Al and Helen's son, Tom Levitt, is available for sale in the lobby. Here to read her grandmother's statement is Tom's daughter, Sarah Starr Levitt.
There's no such thing as an almost freedom. If you modify freedom of expression and conscience and association according to the current popularity of the words expressed and the beliefs held and the people associated with, you have destroyed those freedoms. They are destroyed not only for an unpopular minority, but for everyone. For everyone must then consider his words, excuse my father's sexist pronoun usage, and his beliefs and associations with caution, lest they be interpreted in an unpopular way. Every man has the right to be unpopular or even to be wrong in these areas without suffering the consequence of official censure, blacklist, or jail. Most peace-loving people will find themselves unpopular with this committee. A citizen may be held accountable only for his acts. This principle has been written into our Constitution and has been spelled out for this committee often and eloquently. The committee's continued intimidation of all people under the pretext of attacking a few is its fundamental purpose. I do not, therefore, intend to enter my beliefs or my associations in a popularity contest in which the members of this committee are the judges. I shall offer no cooperation to the evil purpose of these hearings except that which the force of law compels. I shall resist the committee in every way that the Constitution provides.
The day these hearings began, my oldest child started kindergarten. As I sat in this dreary hearing room that day, my thoughts wandered often to my little to my little boy and the wonderful years of learning and discovery that lie ahead of him. Before me was enacted the sordid spectacle of a congressional committee emasculating our American heritage of freedom of conscience, and I wondered what plans it must have in store for rewriting our children's history books. Can they afford to have millions of eager youngsters memorizing such subversive combinations of words as all men are created equal or freedom of speech? Will they add footnotes to the history book saying, of course, when our forefathers spoke of all men being created equal, they did not have the advantage of the 20th century scientific theories of race developed in Nazi Germany? Will they rearrange the classroom schedule so that the atom bomb drill will always interrupt the history class when the kids start asking embarrassing questions like, what does freedom of speech mean if my daddy is blacklisted because he said something somebody doesn't agree with? What am I to teach my son and daughter? Be careful, children, not to think any thoughts that are not allowed. And above all, my children, be cautious about associating with any person who is not thoroughly approved. This would be distasteful, but it would guarantee that my children would then be safe from the threats of blacklist or jail. It might be tempting. Unfortunately, it guarantees no such thing. The approved thoughts and speech and associations of one day might be disapproved on a later day. For my children to be really safe, I must train them to think no thoughts, to speak no words, and to trust no person. It's either that or an America where all people can once more think and speak freely and associate with whom they please without penalty. Faced with such a choice, any mother who feels a responsibility toward her children must take her stand for freedom of conscience and opposition to this committee.
Zero Mustel will take the witness stand.
Zero Mostel was one of the stage and screen's great comic presences. He was beloved for his characters in Fiddler on the Roof, The Producers, and A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, co-starring Jack Gilford. Andrea Marcovici co-starred in the 1976 classic The Front with Woody Allen and Zero, who played Hecky Brown, a comedian driven to suicide by the Blacklist. Tonight, Andrea Marcovici reads her co-star Zero Mostel's 1955 HUAC testimony. Dick Price, co-publisher of our co-sponsor Hollywood Progressive, reads Democratic Congressman Clyde Doyle.
In 1935, I was a painter, an artist, and I worked on WPA as a painter, and subsequently I became an entertainer in 1942. I have been in the entertainment field since.
From 1935 until 1942, you followed the occupation of an artist?
I called myself an artist. Maybe I am the only one who did, but I also did many odd jobs so I could paint. 1942. And then did several independent films for Columbia, Warner Brothers, and I was signed to a contract with 20th Century Fox. Or is it 18th Century Fox? I don't recall. 20th Century Fox. So I would say the next time I appeared was 8 years later in a film. The greatest artistic thing that has ever come down the pike, called The Enforcer, with Humphrey Bogart.
You are also known by Zero as a nickname, are you not?
Yes, sir. After my financial standing in the community, sir.
Were you a member of the Young Communist League prior to being employed at Cafe Society?
That has nothing to do with my employment, obviously. Your question. I refuse to answer that question on the grounds of the Fifth Amendment.
During the course of our hearings, the committee has heard evidence of the assistance given by various persons to the Communist Party by entertaining at Communist Party functions.
And many other meetings held for cancer, heart, common colds, and other favorites. which is a far cry from the accusation that the sole function of the communists is to overthrow the government.
Do you recall having engaged in that entertainment for the Joint Anti-Fascist Refugee Committee?
Was this an organization on the Attorney General's subversive list?
Yes, sir.
Then I decline to answer that question. Incidentally, there are some fine names on it. Durante and Milton Berle.
None of whom has been identified in open session as members of the Communist Party, however.
But, sir, the Joint Anti-Fascist Refugee Committee was on the Attorney General's list. My point is that, nevertheless, the organization for which they appeared apparently here, my memory isn't clear on that, was declared subversive by the Attorney General's list long after the inception of that particular organization. Also, what I understand of your questioning, sir, I wasn't accused or said to be a member of the Communist Party. I am relying on my constitutional privilege, I feel. I am not a big legal brain.
I have before me a photostatic copy of a letter bearing the date of January 21st, 1946, on the letterhead of the American Committee for Spanish Freedom. It is a letter written by the American Committee for Spanish Freedom to the chairman of this committee.
That was foolhardy.
I think there is a red underscoring appearing on the face of the document by the name of Zero Mostel.
I wish it were a blue line. I decline to answer this question on the previous grounds, my constitutional rights.
Did you also become a member of the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists?
No, sir. I have been blacklisted on television.
That we never look forward with pleasure to this sort of hearing or any hearing by this committee where any American citizen is being cross-examined. We do not look forward to it with pleasure.
I sure don't either.
Why don't you remove yourself far away from that atmosphere, sir? You can be much better inspiration and joy to the American people if they just know you that there is not a drop, not an ink point, not a pinpoint of favorable attitude by you toward the communist conspiracy.
My dear friend, I believe in the antiquated idea that a man works in his profession according to his ability rather than his political beliefs. When I entertain, my political beliefs are not spouted. As a matter of fact, I am casual about my political beliefs, which I wouldn't tell anybody unless you are my friend and you are in my house. And I have bad instant coffee I make, I'll tell you that.
I'm not asking about your political beliefs.
My dear friend, I believe in the idea that a human being should go on the stage and entertain to the best of his ability and whatever he wants to say, because we live, I hope, in an atmosphere of freedom in this country.
Communist propaganda cannot exist without the funds that are derived from programs of this kind, and I dare say that your name on these many things for which communist funds were being raised for communist purposes bolstered and furthered those purposes, whether or not you appeared.
Maybe it is unwise and impolitic for me to say this. If I appeared there, what if I did an imitation of a butterfly at rest? Therefore, I was not. There is no crime in making anybody laugh. I don't care if you laugh at me.
If your interpretation of a butterfly at rest brought any money into the coffers of the Communist Party, you contributed directly to the propaganda effort of the Communist Party. Now, there is where it is important.
Suppose I had the urge to do the butterfly at rest somewhere.
Yes, but please, when you have the urge, don't have such an urge to put the butterfly at rest by putting some money in the Communist Party coffers as a result of that urge to put the butterfly at rest. Put the bug to rest someplace else next time.
I suggest we put this hearing butterfly to rest. The tickets, however, were on sale, significantly enough, at the Jefferson Bookshop, which I believe is a notorious communist bookshop. The Workers' Bookshop, they were not on sale at Macy's basement.
They might have been.
The witness is excused. Thank you, Mr. Mostel. Remember what I said to you.
You remember what I said to you.
The committee calls Abraham Polonsky to the stand.
Jeremy Kagan directed Richard Dreyfuss in 1978's The Big Fix, 1975's Catherine about the Weather Underground, Conspiracy, The Trial of the Chicago Eight, and this year's Shot about gun violence. Great film. We have chosen the director of The Chosen to read writer-director Abraham Polonsky's HUAC testimony. Justin Connolly, who's been director of the Southern California for Human Rights Watch for 7 years, will be Congressman Velde. Sharon Kyle, co-publisher of our co-sponsor Hollywood Progressive, reads as Republican Congressman Potter. Without further ado, Polonsky.
What were some of the principal productions with which you were connected?
Oh, I wrote the screenplay Body and Soul, and I collaborated in writing the play Force of Evil. And I was the sole author of the screenplay. I can get it for you wholesale.
Were you an official of Actors Laboratory?
This is a question we'll have to talk about here. I'm going to refuse to answer that question, sir, and insofar as the First Amendment is relevant to it, I'd like to use that one, too.
Question. Would you permit someone to broadcast over your station espousing the views of communism?
I would permit a communist to broadcast over our station, as long as they were a legal entity.
Espousing the views of communism?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
In securing a position with the Office of Strategic Services, did you sign this statement, or did you make this answer to an inquiry that is made, the inquiry being as follows? Did you ever have, or do you now have membership in or support any political party or organization which advocates the overthrow of our constitutional form of government in the United States? To which question there is written the word no.
I signed a lot of forms at that time, and this one looks like one of the many I did sign. That's my signature.
Have you any relatives in Russia?
I wouldn't know. My father was born in Russia. So was my mother, or maybe that was in Poland. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure.
Do you have any knowledge that there's a communist movement in Hollywood?
That seems to go to the general sense of the question, which I've said that I must not answer in order not to incriminate myself, sir. And I refuse to answer that question.
Mr. Polonsky, in refusing to answer these questions, I presume you know that you leave us, or me at least, with the impression that you have been and still are a member of the Communist Party. Further than that, in refusing to answer whether or not you signed a loyalty oath when you went into OSS, you leave me with the impression that you are a very dangerous citizen.
Well, when I cite the Fifth Amendment in order to not incriminate myself, I'm not affirming or denying anything. I'm doing that because the context is the thing today. I'm not trying to leave that implication of anything. The Founding Fathers wrote that the Fifth Amendment for this type of interrogation.
If the United States should be invaded by the Soviet Union, would you bear arms to defend the U.S.?
I've thought about that for a very long and deep time about that, because it's been asked many times of other people up here by this committee, and I don't think by committing ourselves to a war we can get peace. I do not think that is the way to get peace.
Will you bear arms for your country in case of an attack by an aggressor?
I have, in that sense, that when I was asked to volunteer, they said, will you volunteer for a duty that may be dangerous? I didn't want to, but I did.
If you received orders today to serve in Korea, what would be your answer?
I would naturally go. I said to you that I would obey the laws, and I have and will do so in the future. But when you come to the question of war and peace today, that is another question. Because that is a question, in a sense, of fighting for what you believe is correct. I believe if we prepare for war constantly, we will surely have it. And the only peace we will have is the peace of apes and tigers.
Peace by domination.
There will be no domination after the next war, sir. There will be ruin.
We summon Gail Sundergaard.
Using the Oscars to make political speeches began in 1937 when Gail Sondergaard won the first Best Supporting Actress award for Anthony Adverse. In her acceptance speech on live radio, Sondergaard spoke out about the Spanish Civil War. Here to read Gail Sondergaard's HUAC testimony is actress Ileana Douglas, granddaughter of Oscar winner Melvyn Douglas and Congresswoman Helen Gagan Douglas, another hero of mine. After Richard Nixon served as HUAC witch hunter, he ran for U.S. Senator against Helen Gagan Douglas, slandering her as the pink lady who was pink down to her underwear. Please welcome Ileana Douglas.
Thank you. I couldn't bear to be tired when I would look out and see Marcia Hunt here.
I'm sorry.
No, very quickly, I just want to say my grandfather was Melvyn Douglas, of course, and my grandmother, Helen Gahagan Douglas. The reason he said she was pink down to her underwear is that he printed her voting record, which were predominantly sort of liberal votes, as he depicted them, and printed them on pink paper. One of the votes she voted for, she was only one of a handful of Congress people to vote against sending the Hollywood 10 to prison. And so for that, when she was running for Senate, he said she was pink right down to her underwear. And let me tell you something, I am too. So I just had to mention that. Yeah, the other brief thing I wanted to say about Gail Sundergaard, she was actually my father's godmother. They met, my grandfather started a theater company way back in Madison, Wisconsin, and he was in the group with Gail Sondergaard and Ralph Bellamy, and it was actually in that theater group that she met her husband, Howard Bieberman, and unfortunately, because she was married to Howard Bieberman, that's how she ended up sadly becoming blacklisted. She was known back in the day, and this is something that Lee Grant told me, as a pillow red, meaning that you were, simply because you were married to someone, you could be considered a communist. So, and now, you may go, sure.
Thank you. Are you familiar with an organization called the National Council of American Soviet Friendship?
Mr. Chairman, again, I must refer to your long list of organizations and refuse to answer that question on the basis previously stated. May I say something while we are waiting here about this business of suddenly branding every progressive and every progressive organization in our country, organizations which have done wonderful and fine work in the past, branding them as subversive? This I find very shocking and very saddening.
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
I refuse to answer that question for the reasons previously stated.
Do you believe a committee of Congress should investigate subversive activities or the security of our country?
Mr. Congressman, I believe that a committee of Congress could and should do investigating work, but I do feel that this committee at this time is doing incriminating work much more than investigating work. And that is the reason I wish to object.
You wouldn't like to go over some of our files, would you?
Ms. Sundergaard, the records of the committee disclose that you served as a sponsor of the Cultural and Scientific Congress for World Peace, which was held in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City, correct?
It is a very odd thing that whenever the word peace comes up, people begin to tremble. I must refuse to answer that question for reasons previously stated. I wonder if I could interpolate here the fact that I am the wife of Herbert Bieberman. As you asked me before, Herbert Bieberman was one of the Hollywood 10 who who has very recently come out of prison for defending the First Amendment before this committee. In my statement, I have said that in 1937, may I go on?
No.
No, I just wanted that in the record.
Bernard Gordon was subpoenaed to appear in LA in 1952. However, perhaps through a fluke of fate, this unfriendly witness was never actually called to testify. Bernie went on to write under pseudonyms and relocated to Europe. He wrote and/or produced The Day of the Triffids, 55 Days at Peking, and Earth versus the Flying Saucers, wherein UFOs attacked Washington via Ray Harryhausen's special effects. It's often said politics make strange bedfellows. Here, Ellen Gordon recalls a humorous story about her father, blacklisted screenwriter Bernard Gordon.
Oh, hello. It's been a long evening, hasn't it? But I think it's been very interesting to hear other people's stories and to sort of know how we've all got the same history and yet, we've all got the same history and yet very different. As Bernie recounts in his memoir, Hollywood Exile, he wrote frequently under the pen name of Raymond T. Marcus, who actually was a very good friend of his. I grew up with the Marcus children, and now we're all scattered. Dad wrote 1957's Hellcats of the Navy for Columbia Pictures. Apparently, I answered the phone when Charlie Schneer called one time from Columbia and went chirping to Bernie, "Mr. Schneer's on the phone." Anyway, he was delighted because he was writing scenes for Ronnie and Nancy Davis. Reagan had been cast in this film. It would turn out to be the only film in which they appeared together. This was long before Reagan's state or national political triumphs, but at the time, everyone in Hollywood knew he had played a major role in creating and enforcing the Blacklist. Reagan became president of the Screen Actors Guild, and it was not yet known that Reagan, while president of SAG, supplied... I'm missing something here. But he supplied names to something I didn't get. Yeah, supplied names of guild activists and political suspects to the FBI. Hellcats was about the war in the Pacific. In the final breathless action sequence, I wrote the sub-captain, played by Reagan, had to perform a solo dive down into the treacherous waters of the Sea of Japan to free some cables fouling the propeller and thus rescue the sub and crew from an approaching storm of Japanese depth charges. For years after this, friends chided me that I had let Ronnie come up from the depths of the sea and survive for bigger and meaner projects. Hellcats also gave me the opportunity to write a speech for Admiral Nimitz. I wondered how he would feel knowing that a commie had written the words he spoke. Later, when Reagan inhabited the White House, clips of the film were repeatedly played on television. There was our president mouthing some of the better lines I'd written for him, speaking the tender words I'd created for him to say to the love interest who, it turned out, became the First Lady. I fantasized about contacting Reagan, informing him that I was the uncredited, blacklisted screenwriter who had written one of his better roles and consequently believed I was entitled to an invitation to one of the White House dinners.
Thank you. I want to make a quick announcement. If you've read and you've appeared and you have not yet signed a release, I want you to please make sure you see Ken in the lobby on your way out. Don't try to sneak out the side door because we've got C-SPAN here and we want to make sure that we can be able to show this. So if you've been up here and you haven't left, you please sign a release. And also, he's starting a list of his own if you want to get in touch with the families. So get on that list, Ken's list. Screenwriter Michael Wilson was among the most gifted blacklistees. Whether or not he received screen credits when they were released, the two-time Oscar winner wrote or co-wrote The Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia, and 1954's independently made Salt of the Earth, which, if you haven't seen that, you should. Here to read Michael Wilson's 1976 acceptance speech to the Writers Guild for the Laurel Award is his daughter, Becca Wilson.
I don't want to dwell on the past, but for a few moments to speak of the future. And I address my remarks particularly to you younger men and women who'd perhaps not established yourself in this industry at the time of the Great Witch Hunt. I fear that unless you remember this dark epoch and understand it, you may be doomed to replay it. Not with the same cast of characters, of course, or on the same issues. But I foresee a day coming in your lifetime, if not mine, when a new crisis of belief will grip this republic, when diversity of opinion will be labeled disloyalty, when chilling decisions affecting our culture will be made in the boardrooms of conglomerates and networks, when the powers of the programmers and the censors will be expanded, and when extraordinary pressures will be put on writers and the mass media to conform to administration policy on the key issues of the time. If this gloomy scenario should come to pass, I trust that you younger men and women will shelter the mavericks and dissenters in your ranks and protect their right to work. The Guild will have the need of the rebels if it's to survive as a union of free writers. The nation will have need of them if it is to survive as an open society.
Singer, athlete, attorney, actor, and activist Paul Robeson, however, had no doubt that the blacklist existed. In the 1930s, Robeson starred in movies such as The Emperor Jones. He may be best known for his signature song, Old Man River. He used his celebrity to advance the cause of unions, loyalists, Spain, and friendship with the Soviet Union. Around 1949, Robeson publicly expressed doubts that U.S. blacks would fight in a war against the USSR. That year, an anti-red redneck riot erupted when Paul and others performed at Peekskill, New York. Blacklisted, Robeson's annual earnings dropped from $100,000 to $2,000. Although largely prevented from performing here, Robeson was still in big demand abroad, but the U.S. government revoked Paul's passport in 1950. Opera singer and actor K.B. Solomon, who starred in the one-man show about Robeson, Speak of Me As I Am, portrays him in what must have been his greatest role, defiant HUAC witness. His CDs and DVDs are for sale in the lobby, and ACLU's Hector Viagra returns as Congressman Schur.
This morning, the committee resumes hearings on the vital issue of the use of American passports as travel documents in furtherance of the communist conspiracy.
Now, applying for this passport in July of 1954, were you requested to submit a non-communist affidavit?
We had a long discussion with my counsel, who is in the room, Mr. Bodine, with the State Department about just such an affidavit. I was very precise, not only in the application, but with the State Department. Under no conditions would I sign such an affidavit. That is a complete contradiction of the rights of American citizens.
Did you comply with the requests?
I certainly did not and will not.
Are you now a member of the Communist Party?
Oh, please, please, please.
Please answer, will you, Mr. Robeson?
What is the Communist Party? What do you mean by that?
I ask that you direct the witness to answer the question.
What do you mean by the Communist Party? As far as I know, it is a legal party like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Do you mean a party of people who have sacrificed for my people and for all Americans and workers? That they can live in dignity? Do you mean that party?
Are you now a member of the Communist Party?
Would you like to come to the ballot box when I vote and take out the ballot and see? I invoke the Fifth Amendment.
Do you honestly apprehend that if you told this committee truthfully?
I do not desire to consider anything. It is none of your business what I would like to do, and forget it.
You are directed to answer the question.
Gentlemen, in first place, wherever I have been in the world, Scandinavia, England, and many places, the first to die in the struggle against fascism were the communists. And I laid many wreaths upon the graves of communists. It is not criminal, and the Fifth Amendment has nothing to do with criminality.
Mr. Chairman, this is not a laughing matter.
It is a laughing matter to me. This is really complete nonsense. You are the author of the bills that are going to keep out all kinds of decent people out of the country.
No, only your kind.
Colored people like myself, from the West Indies and all kinds. And just the Teutonic Anglo-Saxon stock that you would let come in.
We are trying to make it easier to get rid of your kind, too.
You do not want any colored people to come in.
Proceed.
Could I say that the reason that I am here today is I should not be allowed to travel because I have struggled for years for the independence of the colonial peoples of Africa. For many years, I have also labored, and I can say modestly that my name is very much honored all over Africa in my struggles for their independence. This is the kind of independence like Sukarno got in Indonesia. Unless we are double talking, then these efforts in the interest of Africa would be in the same context. The other reason that I am here today is that when I am abroad, I speak out against the injustices against the Negro people of this land. This is why I am here. This is the basis. And I am not being tried for whether I am a communist. I'm being tried for fighting for the rights of my people who are still second-class citizens in this United States of America. I stand here struggling for the rights of my people to be full citizens in this country, and they are not. They are not in Mississippi, and they are not in Montgomery, Alabama, and they are not in Washington. They are nowhere, and that is why I'm here today. You want to shut up every Negro who has the courage to stand up for the right of his people, for the rights of workers, and I have been on many a picket line for the steel workers too, and that is why I'm here today. Listen to me. I said it was unthinkable to me that any people would take up arms in the name of an Eastland to go against anybody. Gentlemen, I still say that. This U.S. government should go down to Mississippi and protect my people. That's what should happen. In Russia, I felt for the first time like a full human being. No color prejudice like I see in Mississippi. No color prejudice like in Washington. It was the first time I felt like a human being, where I did not feel the pressure of color as I feel it in this committee today.
Why do you not stay in Russia?
Because my father was a slave, and my people died to build this country, and I'm going to stay here and have a part of it just like you, and no fascist-minded people would drive me from it. Is that clear? I'm for peace with the Soviet Union and with China, and I'm not for peace or friendship with fascist Franco, and I'm not for peace with Nazi Germans. I'm for peace with decent people.
You are here because you are promoting the communist cause.
I am here because I'm opposing the neo-fascist cause, which I see arising in these committees. You are like the Alien Sedition Act, and Jefferson could be sitting here. Frederick Douglass could be sitting here, and Eugene Debs could be sitting here. And you, gentlemen, belong with the Alien Sedition Acts, and you are the non-patriots, and you are the un-Americans, and you ought to be ashamed.
Point of order. I have endured all of this that I can.
Can I read my statement?
No, you cannot read it. The meeting is adjourned.
I think it should be, and you should adjourn this forever. This is what I say. Black lives matter, gentlemen.
Oh, wow. Wow, that was really something. The State Department didn't issue Paul Robeson a passport for another 2 years, not until 1958, if you can believe that. Tonight, at the start of our historic remembrance, we noted how people who weren't themselves blacklisted, such as Kirk Douglas and Marcia Hunt, as well as Lee Grant, John Cromwell, Joe Mankiewicz, Otto Preminger, courageously rose to do the right thing and defend those being persecuted. We do not mean to minimize the suffering and heroic resistance of those who refused to be informers when the witch hunters called them to testify. But in addition to recognizing those who were themselves blacklisted, tonight we also honor the men and women who, when the chips were down, stood up for the bullied, the hounded, the oppressed. In taking a bold stand in favor of human rights and simple decency, these brave people often put themselves in harm's way too. Similarly, nowadays, when we see members of groups under attack, immigrants, refugees, religious and ethnic minorities, the free press, we have to join them in acts of resistance, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because if you don't stand up when you witness injustice, next time they may come for you. But nobody may be left to defend you. For those who want to stand up today, 2 events are happening next weekend. The very first Left Coast Forum is taking place at LA Trade Technical College from November 3rd through the 5th. And you've heard from our co-sponsors tonight, Dick and Sharon. They run the Hollywood Progressive and the LA Progressive. I'm sure you're already on the list. And Refuse Fascism is launching nationwide protests on November 4th to drive the Trump-Pence regime from office here in LA. Meet at 1 p.m. at the Pershing Square.
As the First Amendment comes under renewed attack by another tyrannical regime in Washington that assaults the media as fake news and the enemy of the people and threatens to remove broadcast licenses, we end with a reminder of one of American journalism's finest moments. In 1954, Edward R. Murrow challenged Senator Joe McCarthy in his CBS TV news program, See It Now. While HUAC was in the House, McCarthy chaired the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. If HUAC largely pursued the entertainment industry, often using slurs and innuendos, McCarthy and his subcommittee focused on alleged communist subversion in the federal government and U.S. Army, although McCarthy did call some artists to testify, such as Howard Fast, author of the novel Spartacus. Brooklyn schoolteacher Richard Rampell took a knee in the 1950s by refusing to sign a loyalty oath. The civil libertarian was impressed by Murrow's audacity in tackling McCarthy on television, which marked the beginning of the end of McCarthy's reign of terror. Rampell went on to name his only son after the legendary newsman. When Ed Rampell met Murrow's producer Fred Friendly in 1988, Rampell showed Fred the letter he had sent to his dad. Friendly said, "You're the only journalist in America named after Ed." We must never forget that McCarthy's chief counsel, Roy Cohn, went on to become Donald Trump's attorney. Here to read his namesake, Edward R. Murrow's rebuttal to Joe McCarthy, is the Hollywood Blacklist Commemoration's co-organizer, Ed Rampell.
It is necessary to investigate before legislating, but the line between investigating and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly. His primary achievement has been in confusing the public mind as between the internal and the external threats of communism. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, Mr. Trump, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine and remember that we are not descended from fearful men and women, not from men and women who fear to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes that were, for the moment, unpopular. This is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent. We can deny our heritage and our history, but we cannot escape responsibility for the result. There is no way for a citizen of a republic to abdicate his responsibilities. As a nation, we have come into our full inheritance at a tender age. We proclaim ourselves, as indeed we are, the defenders of freedom, wherever it continues to exist in the world, but we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay amongst our allies abroad and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear. He merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck.
Thank you, everybody. We have to be out of here in less than 4 minutes. No joke. So I want everyone to stand up with Ed. Let's thank Ed, and let's all say, on the count of 3, we are Spartacus. 1, 2, 3. We are Spartacus. After party at your own expense at Cantor's, everybody. We're all going there. They're still open.
Thanks, guys. You did really well. Thank you. Good job. Long night.
Interested in American History TV?